Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the soot-caked, gaslit streets of Victorian London, where insomnia isn't some quirky lifestyle complaint, it's a full-body affliction wrapped in smog and moral panic. You're lying awake, stiff-backed, on a lumpy horsehair mattress, while outside, the city clinks and groans like a rusted machine that never quite turns off. The gas lamps hiss, rats shuffle in the eaves, and your brain races through unpaid debts, Dickensian guilt, and the suspicious movement of the maid's shadow on the landing. You can smell coal in the air and faintly hear the sound of boots on cobblestones. You're not just tired. You are Victorian tired, which is worse, because your doctor thinks your soul might be fraying and your mattress is probably stuffed with straw and regret. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the late night, hours like you're dragging a coffin full of bricks. It's 1857. Queen Victoria's empire is booming. But you haven't had a decent night's sleep in 3 weeks. And neither has your neighbor, or his horses, or the constable loitering outside the gin shop. Insomnia is spreading across the industrial world like soot on white linens. The cause? That's debatable. Historians still argue whether it was the rise of artificial light, the grind of shift labor, or just plain anxiety about living in a world that had suddenly filled with telegraphs, train timetables, and looming existential dread. Sleep, once dictated by natural light and animal rhythm, is now warped by gas lamps and a factory whistle. Your body wants darkness and rest, but your world says keep going. You pace your narrow room, hearing the creak of iron bedframes in the rooms below. Even the mice sound exhausted. It's not just you. Entire households are quietly unraveling. After midnight, children are tucked in hours ago, but mothers remain upright, candle in hand, stitching away at fraying seams of sanity. Fathers drink sleeping cordial in the parlor, more alcohol than medicine, and stare blankly at the fire. Across the city, someone's reading the Bible aloud, hoping Leviticus will bore them into unconsciousness. Spoiler, it doesn't work. You stare out the window. Gaslight flickers against bricks slick with fog. There's no quiet in London. Even at midnight, the market carts groan, drunks yell, dogs bark at things only dogs can see. The glow from the gas lamps meant to civilize the streets now creeps into every crevice of your home. The night is no longer dark, it's haunted with semi-light, a spectral glow that mocks sleep without offering rest. Artificial illumination, that wonder of Victorian progress, turns out to be a brilliant saboteur of circadian rhythms. Not that anyone knows the term circadian rhythm. No, they call it nervous exhaustion, overwrought constitution, or simply weakness of spirit. The growing cult of sleeplessness isn't just a physical complaint, it's a full-blown crisis of identity. Doctors pontificate in newspapers about the dangers of overstimulation. Man, one surgeon writes, was not made for the modern age. Translation: you're not just failing to sleep, you're failing at being a functional Victorian. To cope, you try the usual remedies: a brisk walk in the fog, a spoonful of treacle, a silent prayer to whichever saint handles insomnia. A warm bath sounds tempting, until you remember the water takes an hour to heat and involves lifting boiling kettles in a corset. Maybe you try reading. The newspaper? Too agitating. A novel? Too stimulating. So you settle for medical journals, which suggest terrifying things like leeches for restlessness, or bed rest in a darkened chamber, preferably padded. Cozy, if you're wealthy. Your sleeplessness is rebranded as ennui, sophisticated malaise brought on by excessive piano music and worrying about foreign tariffs. But if you're poor, you get no such poetic framing. You're told to drink less. Gin, and maybe stop having so many children. Either way, your lack of sleep is considered a personal failing. You must be overindulgent, too intellectual, too lazy, or worst of all, masturbating. Yes, that's a thing. Victorian doctors blame sleeplessness on self-abuse, and they really want you to stop touching yourself. There are pamphlets, illustrations, even mechanical devices, most of them horrifying, to keep you from indulging in what they believe drains your life force and your ability to rest. You start to wonder if maybe you're not just sleep deprived. Maybe you're cursed. The irony, of course, is that as you toss and turn, you're also part of the world's most organized sleep revolution. The Victorians didn't just suffer insomnia. They tried to control it, analyze it, and monetize it. Every sleepless night spawned a new cure, a new theory, a new gadget. Your cousin swears by goose down pillows. Your aunt mixes milk of magnesia with peppermint oil. A neighbor sleeps upright in a chair like a bat. Someone you know probably bought an anti-insomnia hat filled with herbs. It didn't work. Meanwhile, the medical establishment is both baffled and gleeful. Sleep clinics of the era are often just converted drawing rooms with fancy wallpaper, but patients pay dearly to sit there in silence while being examined like twitchy zoo animals. One pioneering doctor in Manchester insists insomnia is due to poor blood circulation and attempts to cure it with foot tickling. Another claims it's your liver misbehaving. Yet another blames insufficient moral fiber. Rest, they say, is for the righteous, which is great, unless you're a coal miner with 12-hour shifts and no righteousness to spare. All this creates a perfect storm. A city that never sleeps, lit by fire and fear, obsessed with timekeeping, struggling to define rest in an age of restless ambition. You begin to fantasize about sleep the way starving people dream of bread. You'd kill for 4 uninterrupted hours. You'd trade your favorite boots for a nap that doesn't end with screaming in Latin from the neighbors upstairs. And yet, night after night, you return to the same haunted silence, with only the tick of the mantel clock and the slow, wet breath of the wallpaper peeling behind your bed for company. You haven't blinked in what feels like 20 minutes, and your eyes sting with that familiar dry ache that only the terminally exhausted understand. The gas lamp outside is still flickering, performing its silent one-man show for nobody in particular. A milkman clatters past. Yes, it's that late or that early, depending on your mood, and his cartwheel squeals like a soul in purgatory. Victorian London has no chill. Even at the edge of dawn, it hums like an overworked boiler, about to blow. And you, just one more body trapped in this unholy marriage of progress and paranoia, feel every tick of its insomnia. It's easy to imagine that all of England is lying in bed beside you, equally restless, equally irritated, and equally unsure whether this whole industrialized life experiment was worth it. By the mid-19th century, sleeplessness wasn't just a medical concern, it was a full-blown societal epidemic. Doctors, ministers, and newspaper columnists couldn't stop talking about it. They blamed everything: caffeine, gaslighting, city noise, digestion, novels, overeducation, undereducation, improper corset use, and of course, that age-old scapegoat female hysteria. Historians still argue whether the Victorian obsession with insomnia was a product of actual health decline, or just another way the era loved to self-flagellate over modern life. What's certain is that no one was sleeping. Well, not the children of factory workers, not the powdered debutantes in Mayfair, not even Prince Albert, though his mustache probably slept soundly. There was simply too much going on, too many ticking clocks, too much streetlight, too many sermons about sin. You roll over, your face smushed into a pillow that smells faintly of lavender and decades of sweat. If you lived in a working-class home, and let's face it, odds are good you're sharing that room with at least 2 siblings and maybe a coughing uncle who swears. He doesn't snore, but definitely does. Privacy is a myth, so is quiet. The Walls are thin enough to hear every wheeze and every shift of mattress straw. The chamber pot is too close, and the fireplace never quite does its job. Above you, the attic holds pigeons or ghosts, maybe both. Below you, the floorboards creak with some indecipherable rodent drama. It's hard to believe this is home, let alone somewhere you're supposed to find peace. But insomnia isn't classist. Even the upper crust is suffering. Aristocrats with more bedrooms than friends are calling in physicians, requesting opiates by the jar, and draping velvet over their windows to block out the moonlight. Their journals overflow with moans about the blasted sleep thief and nerves, so ragged they twitch of their own accord. You picture one such gentleman now, draped dramatically on a chaise lounge, sighing into a glass of brandy as he tells his valet that he simply cannot rest while the Irish question remains unresolved. This man has never shoveled coal in his life, but he will weep if his 9 p.m. foot bath is slightly too cool. Still, you envy him. He can afford the best bedding, imported from India or woven by monks or blessed by the Pope, and here you are, just trying not to fall asleep into a cracked chamber pot. Doctors try to help, though their efforts are like prescribing a feather for a toothache. Some recommend strict bedtime routines, go to sleep by 10, no reading in bed, no stimulating conversation after supper. Others suggest nighttime exercise, or counting backwards from 1,000 while imagining sheep. One recommends the reverse. Hammock method, basically a swing that rocks you while you're bound like a Victorian burrito. Spoiler, it's not comforting. It's terrifying. Then there's the infamous cold sponge treatment, where someone literally douses you with icy water before bed to shock your system into calm. That someone is usually your spouse. Romance lives here. There's also the dietary angle. Health gurus insist food is to blame. Heavy dinners weigh on your gut and disturb your rest, they say. So you're encouraged to eat lightly boiled vegetables. Milk, maybe a biscuit, but God help you if you eat cheese. Cheese gets blamed for everything. Nightmares? Cheese. Night sweats? Cheese. Communing with the devil in your dreams? Must have been the cheddar. You develop an unhealthy relationship with food and an even unhealthier relationship with the concept of nighttime. It's no longer a time for dreams. It's a battleground. You dread it the way a soldier dreads bugle calls. Here comes the long siege of silence, interrupted only by the crackle of dying fire and your own rattled breathing. And still, the city does not sleep. Victorian London is a beast of burden, panting under its own weight. The factories run in shifts, the printing presses never stop, and if you listen closely, you can hear the scratch of 10,000 pens recording ledgers, letters, and legal threats well past midnight. Commerce doesn't need rest, it demands output. Even at this hour, someone somewhere is inventing a new machine to replace you, or a new tonic to sell you. And insomnia? It's become another business opportunity. Newspapers run ads for sleep aids with charmingly alarming names. Dr. Frobisher's Night Draft, the Gentleman's Brain Tonic, Morpheus Syrup for Delicate Women. You read that one contains chloral hydrate, another includes powdered opium and beet juice. One uses elderflower and promises no dreams, no sin, just peace. They all taste like punishment. But you try them anyway, everyone does. The hunger for sleep is so strong it overpowers common sense. You know a man who swears by a tincture made from rotting apples and cod liver oil. He hasn't blinked in days, but he insists it's working. Even religion gets in on the action. Preachers warn that sleeplessness might be a sign of spiritual unrest. Perhaps you've sinned. Perhaps your soul needs scrubbing. You consider repenting just in case. You kneel by your bed, whisper a few apologies to whatever divine force might be clocked in tonight, and hope that humility counts as melatonin. But the guilt only makes you more awake. Did you lie? Did you covet your neighbor's goat? Did you forget to say grace last Thursday? You stare at the ceiling, wondering if the angels are keeping score. And just when you start to drift, just when your body begins to betray you with that sweet, syrupy tilt toward unconsciousness. Someone drops a cold bucket on the floor too. Doors down, and it's back to square one. You sigh. You've memorized every crack in the ceiling. You know which board creaks when the wind blows just right. You could draw a blueprint of your bedroom with your eyes closed, and you often do. Mentally, just to kill time. You fantasize about running away, not to some grand adventure, but to a bed with clean sheets, a noise machine, and blackout curtains. Something so achingly modern, it makes your chest hurt. The irony, of course, is that you live in the age of progress, trains, telegrams, sanitation. The modern world promised convenience, but instead, it has delivered sleeplessness by design. The very things meant to elevate humanity have trapped it in a prison of restless nights. You envy your ancestors, the farmers who went to bed at sundown and woke with the rooster, unaware of time zones, profit margins, or existential dread. You'd trade your boots for one good yawn, but instead, you lie here, wide-eyed in a city that's forgotten how to dream. You rub your temples as the fourth hour without sleep rolls over you, like fog spilling into a cellar. Your thoughts slosh from one fear to another: rent due, your sister's cough, the curious itch behind your left eye that you're now convinced is brain fever. Desperation bubbles up. You consider briefly what a Victorian doctor might prescribe for such an unquiet soul. Spoiler: it's probably something that would knock out a racehorse or mildly embalm you. The medical response to insomnia in the 19th century was a chaotic buffet of guesswork, narcotics, and righteous finger-wagging. You're not just a sleepless person. You are, according to your physician, a case, and not the fun kind. You're about to join a parade of Victorians who wander into clinics with dark circles under their eyes and leave with either a prescription, an exorcism, or a bill for services rendered and absolutely no relief. When you finally drag yourself to the doctor, half ghost, half petulant toddler, he greets you with the same bedside warmth one might reserve for a misbehaving plant. He adjusts his pince-nez, frowns at your pallor, asks pointedly about your digestion, and then jots something illegible in a leather-bound ledger. You are nervously disposed. This is a popular diagnosis. It means everything and nothing. Perhaps your liver is underwhelming. Perhaps your spine is too stiff. Or maybe, and this is his personal favorite, you are morally deficient. Because in the Victorian medical worldview, the body and soul are not so much roommates as conjoined twins, dragging each other into crisis at every turn. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors truly believed all sleeplessness had spiritual roots, or whether they just ran out of ideas. One camp claims these diagnoses were a sneaky way to enforce social control. Another argues they were genuine attempts to understand mental health before psychology had actual tools. Either way, the result is the same: you leave with a treatment plan that includes fresh air, no reading after dinner, one raw egg before bed, and, bafflingly, tight socks. Yes, compression socks were considered soothing. Nothing says relaxation like cutting off circulation to your toes. But wait, there's more. If your sleeplessness persists, and of course it does, you'll be encouraged to explore more serious interventions. First up, the tonics. Laudanum, a deliciously Victorian blend of opium and alcohol, is prescribed so casually it might as well be peppermint. Your pharmacist dispenses it with a smile and a wink, like you're in on some ghastly inside joke. The first time you try it, you do sleep, sort of. You also dream you're being chased by headless tax collectors. But hey, it's rest. After a few nights, though, the laudanum stops working. You build a tolerance faster than a Victorian chimney sweep climbing the social ladder, which is to say very, very slowly but still disappointingly real. Next, you try bromide salts, then chloral hydrate, then ether. Your bedtime routine starts to sound like an apothecary's shopping list. And yet, the exhaustion remains. For the record, none of these were gentle remedies. Most were heavy tranquilizers before the term existed. They bludgeoned the nervous system into submission. And people loved them. One popular sleep aid, Godfrey's cordial, was so potent it made babies pass out for hours, sometimes permanently. Entire generations grew up with access to what were essentially Victorian roofies, and they were sold next to the mustard jars. You marvel at the collective trust society placed in mysterious brown bottles. Drink this, says the label. Ignore the twitching. That's normal. But if drugs fail, and often they do, you may be offered the real showstopper. Electrotherapy. A buzzword of the century, quite literally. Practitioners believe jolting your nerves with carefully measured, completely random electricity would realign your sleep patterns. They strap you into a chair, dab your temples with water, and connect you to a hand-cranked dynamo. The shock is brief but eye-watering. Your hair stands up. Your dignity, not so much. If you're lucky, you walk out with only a headache and some mild burns. If you're not, you're told to come back twice a week and bring more money. Then there's hydrotherapy, which sounds soothing until you realize it involves being wrapped like a meatloaf in wet sheets and locked in a room that smells like despair and camphor. The theory is simple. Cold water shocks the system, resets the nerves. Reality: you lie there shivering, thinking about soup, and wondering if sleep is a myth perpetuated by poets and housecats. At some of the nicer clinics, you might be given a full bath, hot, cold, alternating, while a nurse reads you scripture. At the less nice ones, they just dunk you and pray. Some physicians take a more psychological approach, though that's a generous term for what often amounts to very stern talking tos. They encourage you to confess your anxieties, but only if those anxieties are polite. Anything too emotional, too complex, too female gets filed under hysteria. Women in particular are viewed with suspicion. If a man can't sleep, it's because he works too hard. If a woman can't sleep, it's because she thinks too much. The cure? Rest, silence, and less thinking. Some are prescribed bed rest for weeks. No books, no conversation, no eye contact. A few spiral deeper into illness. Others just get bored enough to pretend they're better. If none of this works, and let's be honest, it doesn't, you might end up in one of the newfangled nervous hospitals. These aren't asylums, they insist. They're sanatoriums. Places for recovery and reflection. In reality, they're often just quiet prisons with better wallpaper. You're allowed a daily walk in the garden. You're served lukewarm broth and herbal tea. You listen to a man with a walrus mustache explain that your suffering is likely hereditary, and that your mother probably read too many novels while pregnant with you. Then he prescribes belladonna and recommends spiritual journaling. You don't have the energy to argue. Eventually, you begin to internalize it. Maybe you are broken. Maybe your nerves are too modern for your body. Maybe the machinery of life has outpaced your spirit. You stare into a mirror and barely recognize yourself, not just from the bags under your eyes, but from the way your shoulders hunch under the weight of being awake for too long. You've started talking to furniture. You've started naming your coughs. There's a long, slow transformation underway, and it's turning you into someone who flinches at shadows and hears meaning in every distant clock chime. Still, you persist. Because what else is there to do? The treatment carousel never stops. New doctors open new clinics, promising fresh theories. One swears by magnetic minerals. Another recommends goat milk enemas. A third wants to hypnotize your subconscious into compliance. And the desperate, like you, try them all. Not because you believe in any of it, but because hope is a habit, and habits are hard to break. Especially at 3:17 in the morning. You sit on the edge of your creaking bed, staring into a chipped porcelain cup filled with something that can only be described as brownish broth. It jiggles ominously. It's called beef tea, and no, that's not a euphemism, it's exactly what it sounds like. You take a tentative sip. Warm, salty, slightly oily. Definitely cow adjacent. This is what a Victorian physician has prescribed to ease your frayed nerves and lull you into a restful slumber. Not brandy. Not opium. Not even a lullaby. Just a mug of boiled cow water. It's the 1800s, and someone out there genuinely believes that this is the cure for insomnia. And not just someone, an alarming number of doctors are swearing by this sleepy time meat infusion. You are not comforted. The idea is rooted in the Victorian obsession with nutrition and the growing field of scientific dietetics. According to the thinking of the time, beef tea is rich in vitality, its liquefied strength, the very essence of animal vigor distilled into a consumable form. Historians still argue whether beef tea was ever truly effective, or if it was just another example of the era's boundless enthusiasm for warm, questionable liquids. Either way, it was fashionable. Hospitals served it. Households swore by it. Queen Victoria herself was rumored to have sipped it during times of stress. You try not to think too hard about what else she might have drunk while her empire was busy inventing tabloid journalism and repressing continence. So, there you are, spooning the last bits of beefy residue from your cup, waiting for the promised wave of serenity. Instead, your stomach gurgles ominously, and your brain feels exactly the same, wired, haunted, slightly offended. You lie down, hoping the broth kicks in eventually. It doesn't, because it's broth. Your body knows this. Your insomnia knows this. But the Victorians? They don't know what else to do, so they double down. If one cup doesn't work, try two. Add a pinch of nutmeg. Stir in egg yolk. Suddenly you're slurping a medieval stew at midnight and calling it a cure. Of course, beef tea wasn't the only item on the Victorian sleepy time menu. Enter warm lettuce water. Yes, lettuce. The limp, often mocked filler of sandwiches and side salads. According to 19th century folk wisdom, lettuce has calming properties. Boil it gently, sip the resulting pale green juice, and sleep shall descend like a blessed fog. That's the promise, at least. The reality is that it smells faintly of boiled socks and tastes like someone steeped sadness in a teacup. Still, desperate times call for desperate salad. You gulp it down, trying to ignore the sludgy bits floating on the surface. The belief in lettuce's sedative powers isn't entirely pulled from the ether. The plant contains a mild chemical compound, lacticarium, sometimes called lettuce. Opium, which does have a sedating effect, though you'd need to eat roughly your own body weight in romaine to feel anything more than disappointment. Nevertheless, the Victorians ran with it. Warm lettuce drinks became a bedtime staple in certain circles. Wealthier households even had special lettuce tea infusers. You picture a silver strainer filled with soggy leaves and can't decide whether to laugh or cry. Probably both. Quietly, under your quilt. While sleep continues to play hard to get, you try alternating your treatments. Beef tea one night, lettuce the next, sometimes both. One recipe you read about combines the two with a sprinkle of sugar and a whisper of nutmeg. It's like drinking a Victorian dare. But that's the thing about the sleepless, you'll try anything. You're beyond shame, beyond taste, beyond reason. You are a lab rat in your own bedroom, dosing yourself with edible metaphors for desperation. And all the while, the experts nod solemnly from their velvet chairs and declare you a model patient. Meanwhile, the broader public begins to embrace these bizarre culinary sedatives. Cookbooks offer chapters on nervous dishes. There are lettuce soups, lettuce jellies, beef custards. Entire menus designed to knock you out by course 3. Victorian dinner parties include post-supper infusions meant to quiet the nerves. Sleep becomes not just a need, but a lifestyle brand. And like all lifestyle brands, it has accessories. Fancy carafes for your beef tea. Monogrammed lettuce teacups. One enterprising entrepreneur even markets beef lozenges, For those who want nighttime protein without the inconvenience of a spoon. It is a deliciously absurd era. Still, for all their effort, the Victorians can't outrun the central problem. None of this really works. Not consistently. Not scientifically. What these potions and broths do offer is ritual. And ritual, for the sleepless, can feel like power. The act of preparing your tea, heating your water, arranging your pillow just so it gives the illusion of control. And in a world that increasingly feels like a runaway train belching steam and guilt, control is everything. Even if it tastes like boiled lettuce, you begin to develop superstitions around your nightly concoctions. Maybe if you stir clockwise, it'll work better. Maybe if you chant a little rhyme while it cools. You create habits that become almost religious in their rigidity. You wear the same socks. You tap the edge of your mug 3 times. You refuse to speak to anyone between sipping and lying down. Friends and family learn not to interrupt. You are the high priest of beef tea and lettuce, and your temple is a bed you can't fall asleep in. There's a tragic comedy to it all. An empire that can conquer nations, build railroads through mountains, and invent the sandwich still can't figure out how to help its people sleep. And so, it doubles down on the ridiculous. You read articles in the paper about new sleep methods from abroad. One French doctor recommends sleeping standing up, like a flamingo. Another from Germany insists you should only sleep with your head pointing north. You try that. You rotate your bed. Nothing changes except your view of the cracked ceiling. The medical journals continue their slow, starchy march through ever stranger recommendations. One report claims sniffing vinegar before bed calms the nerves. Another encouraged bed shaking, a process that involves literally jostling the sleeper into unconsciousness. You consider asking your brother to kick the mattress rhythmically, but he's already asleep because of course he is. You envy him. You resent him. You briefly consider smothering him with a pillow, but you'd miss his snoring. It's the only background noise you trust. And still, you drink the tea. You sip the lettuce. You try not to think about the cow it came from or the garden it once lived in. You remind yourself that these are ancient cures, traditional, time-honored. You lie to yourself. That's part of the process now. Just like how you pretend not to hear the clock ticking, or the drip in the corner, or the whisper of fog against the window. Every night is a performance. You, the tired actor delivering your lines. I'm sure I'll fall asleep soon. You whisper, tonight's the night. You say it like a prayer, like a spell. And like all good magic tricks, it works only when you believe in it. Unfortunately, you no longer do. You sit cross-legged on the floor, swaddled in a faded wool blanket that smells faintly of camphor and old soap, trying to will yourself into drowsiness. Your stomach churns gently from the now ritualistic intake of beef tea and lettuce water. Your breath is shallow. Your eyelids feel like they're made of lead and adrenaline. Still, you don't sleep. You glance over at the timepiece on the mantel, a brass contraption that ticks with infuriating cheerfulness, and see that it's 2:30. Again, you've been here before. Every night starts with hope and ends with this same eerie stillness, where even the rats seem to be sleeping better than you. At some point, you begin to wonder if the problem isn't just physical. Maybe there's something wrong with your soul. In Victorian Britain, this isn't an eccentric thought, it's the dominant theory. You've entered an era where moral behavior and physical health are tangled together like twin vines. And if you're sleepless, people start to ask pointed questions. Are you sinning? Are you slothful? Or worse, are you engaging in solitary vices that shall not be named before tea time? In the age of corsets and coal fires, sleep hygiene isn't just a health matter. It's a moral performance. You're expected to go to bed at a reasonable hour, wake with the dawn, say your prayers, and never, under any circumstance, drift into unproductive habits. Staying up too late? That's not just unhealthy, it's unseemly. It implies laziness or excess. Or worse, it suggests you might be thinking too much. In a society obsessed with appearances, especially among the middle and upper classes, sleep is a metric of virtue. The well-rested are assumed to be balanced, industrious, and God-fearing. The restless, troubled, weak, possibly degenerate. Your insomnia becomes a whispering shadow that follows you throughout the day. Did you see her eyes? Someone murmurs. Always so red, and the fidgeting, it's not natural. Historians still argue whether Victorian sleep anxiety was rooted in religious doctrine, industrial discipline, or simply the result of too many sermons on the dangers of masturbation. Either way, the effect is clear. Insomnia becomes a mark of moral ambiguity, especially for women. A sleepless man might be overworked or noble in his quiet suffering. A sleepless woman, however, is a puzzle. Is she melancholic, hysterical, spiritually corrupted? Female insomniacs are often diagnosed with nerve weakness, a condition that seems to cover every possible emotion except joy. The remedy: confinement, mild sedation, and absolutely no stimulation of any kind. No novels, no music, no conversations longer than 2 minutes. It's basically being treated like a houseplant, but with more shame. You adjust your blanket and try to mimic the model Victorian sleeper. You place your hands gently over your abdomen. You breathe slowly. You imagine scenes of pastoral calm, sheep grazing, clouds drifting, your father not lecturing you about ambition. It doesn't work. Your mind instead replays every conversation you've had in the last 6 months, now annotated with new regrets. Sleep hygiene, it turns out, is a concept easier printed in moral guides than practiced in gaslit tenements. You remember reading a pamphlet titled The Restful Household, which suggested that bedrooms should be painted in calming hues, contain no books or clocks, and be free from the disruptive presence of excess drapery. You laugh softly. Your room is 15 feet square and contains a bed, a chair, and a religious calendar that's 2 years out of date. Excess drapery isn't the problem. It's the chronic existential dread and rotting floorboards. Still, you try to comply. You tidy your bedding nightly. You take short walks before dusk. You eliminate all excessive thoughts after 8 p.m., though it's unclear what qualifies. Is wondering where your socks disappear to excessive? What about thinking about death? Or taxes, or that one time you dropped a potato in church? Sleep hygiene, as practiced in the Victorian era, has the exact vibe of an etiquette manual crossed with a passive-aggressive sermon. And it's deeply class-dependent. The wealthy can afford fresh linens, soft pillows, and separate rooms. The poor share beds, often head to toe, with family members or strangers. In industrial cities, some even rent sleep by the hour 8 pence for a hammock, 5 for a bench, and if you're really broke, 2 for a rope strung wall to wall where you can lean your weight and doze semi-upright like a drunk marionette. These are real things. Victorian sleep arrangements could make a horror novelist weep. And yet the ideology persists. If you don't sleep, it must be your fault. You're not pure enough, not disciplined enough, not grateful enough. This guilt is particularly weaponized in domestic literature. Women's journals urge mothers to create peaceful home environments through strict bedtime regimens. Children who don't sleep are presumed to be spiritually neglected. Husbands who toss and turn may be reacting to their wives' failure to maintain household harmony. No pressure. Your entire family's mental stability apparently depends on whether you fluff the pillows correctly, and avoid spicy food. You think of all the advice you've received over the years. Aunt Miriam says you should sprinkle lavender on your nightgown. Your uncle recommends brisk rubbing of the scalp before bed. The neighbor insists on reciting Psalm 23 backward while sitting in a zinc tub. There's a woman in town who swears by sleeping on a diagonal with 1 foot sticking out from under the blanket. You've tried them all. Nothing sticks. It's not that you're not trying. It's that the entire world seems designed to keep you awake. Even your mattress conspires against you. Victorian bedding is rarely soft. Most middle-class homes rely on horsehair or straw mattresses, lumpy, uneven, and highly flammable. Pillows are stuffed with feathers if you're lucky, rags if you're not. Bed sheets are washed infrequently and dried on lines where soot and gossip cling to them like second skins. You long for something cool, something smooth, something modern. But instead, you nestle into your glorified hay bale, flanked by 2 moth-eaten bolsters and a quilt, so heavy it might have been designed to suppress rebellion. By now it's past 3. You hear the slow chime of the hallway clock echo through the wooden floorboards. Your body aches. Your head feels like it's filled with damp wool. You consider breaking the moral code and reading a novel. But what if that makes it worse? What if it confirms everything the pamphlets warned you about? That stories confuse the mind, inflame the blood, and make sleep impossible? You opt instead for a quick prayer. You whisper apologies to the saints, to your ancestors, to the beef tea. Nothing happens. You remain wide awake. Your eyes start to water. You remember reading somewhere that sleep is when the soul resets itself. That without sleep, your essence frays. You start to believe it. Not just metaphorically, but physically. You can feel parts of yourself unraveling, memories going soft around the edges, temper shortening, thoughts skipping like scratched records. You think, perhaps, if you were more righteous, more obedient, more clean-minded, sleep would come. And you're not alone in this. The entire Victorian culture echoes with the idea that sleeplessness is not just a symptom, but a sentence. Proof that something deep inside you is off-kilter, waiting to be punished or purified. You curl tighter under the blanket, trying to disappear into the folds. You think of the morning to come, of breakfast in silence, of your mother's worried eyes, of the endless hum of activity that starts at 7 sharp and does not stop until dark. You try one more breath ritual, one more lettuce thought, one more whispered, please. But sleep, like virtue, remains just out of reach. You lie perfectly still, convinced that if you move even one toe, sleep will see it as an invitation to flee once more. The air around you is thick with the faint scent of starch and last night's stew. Your room is quiet, except for the soft tick of the clock and the occasional groan from the wood beams, as if the house itself is annoyed that you're still awake. You're following all the rules. The gas lamp's been snuffed. You haven't read a novel in 3 nights. You've even arranged your bedclothes according to that dreadful etiquette book that claims unwrinkled sheets are the key to God's mercy and unconsciousness. And yet here you are, again, gazing at the ceiling, wondering if the Victorians weren't just tired. They were being punished by the very society they helped construct. Because in this world, sleep isn't just health. It's proof you're a good person. And the moment you can't do it, the entire system turns against you. Victorian culture is obsessed with the idea that every personal shortcoming is actually a moral failure in disguise. Sleep too much? You're lazy. Sleep too little? You're anxious and unstable. Take naps? You're probably undisciplined. No matter how you slice it, your relationship with rest is not your own. It belongs to your employer, your clergyman, your physician, and most insultingly, your in-laws. You begin to internalize it. Every night you don't sleep is another mark against your character. Even children are judged. Babies who cry at night are considered poorly trained. Young girls who fidget in bed are suspected of reading romance novels or developing opinions. Victorian advice books recommend early sleep training involving darkness, silence, and the occasional terrifying lecture about the dangers of waking up impure. The message is clear. Sleep must be earned. Not by relaxing, but by behaving. This notion seeps into every corner of the household. Bedrooms are arranged with military precision. Curtains must be drawn just so, not too open lest the moon corrupt you, not too closed lest the devil think. You're hiding something. Chamber pots must be placed at a respectful angle from the bed, not for sanitation, but for modesty. Even nightgowns have moral weight. Too short, you're indecent. Too long, you're vain. You begin to wonder if the reason you're not sleeping is that your buttons are mismatched and the saints are judging you. Historians still debate whether Victorian society really believed in this strict moral sleep equation, or if it was simply a convenient tool for enforcing order. But the result is the same. Rest becomes a status symbol, and insomnia becomes a scandal. If a lady confesses she hasn't slept well, it's whispered that she's troubled, a term broad enough to include everything from illicit love to indigestion. For men, it's slightly more acceptable, especially if they work in banking or politics. He carries the burdens of empire, someone might say as he stumbles into a carriage looking like he wrestled a chimney sweep. For everyone else, it's a quiet humiliation. You imagine yourself in a drawing room, eyes puffy from another night of nothing, pretending to be alert while sipping tea that tastes like lawn trimmings. Someone asks if you're feeling well. You lie, of course. Slept like a log, you mutter, hoping your sarcasm is read as wit and not confession. But your hands tremble when you hold the cup, and someone notices, and then it begins. The suggestions, the advice, the polite but pointed inquiries about your habits, your meals, your walks, your readings. Someone recommends you try lying on the floor with a Bible under your head. Another swears by counting backward from 300 while imagining sheep made of pure thoughts. You nod, thank them, and wonder why sleep must be so performative. Back at home, you adopt new rituals. Not because they work, but because they prove you're trying. You wipe down your bedframe with lavender oil. You light a small beeswax candle for precisely 7 minutes, then blow it out, hoping the smoke carries your anxiety with it. You avoid strong emotions after dinner. You take slow, ladylike breaths. You stop talking about the noise from next door, even though it keeps you up. Because complaining is unseemly. Because women are supposed to be silent sufferers. Because men are supposed to fix things without admitting there's a problem. You start keeping a notebook beside your bed, not to write dreams, but to document the failure of them. 2:04, heard cat scream again. 2:17, ceiling crack, shaped like Queen Victoria's eyebrow. 2:39, considered the death of stars. It's your private record of mental erosion. Somewhere between diary and evidence. If anyone found it, you'd be mortified, but it keeps you sane, in a way. Gives shape to the fog, names the beasts in your brain. You wish someone had done this in the pamphlets. You wish they had written about what it feels like to be awake when the world tells you to be still. Instead, they give you commandments. Do not read in bed. Do not talk in bed. Do not cry in bed. If you must emote, do so privately and only during daylight. These manuals are less about helping and more about shaming. Rest is the reward of the righteous, one declares in bold type. You wonder if that's meant to be comforting. It's not. It's smug. It's like being told that if you were a better person, you wouldn't be in this mess. You stare at your ceiling and imagine punching that pamphlet right in its typeface dot, so you improvise. You develop your own little sleep rules, your own sacred code. You won't eat after sunset unless it's a spoonful of jam. You fold your socks 3 times before bed. You hum the first bars of a hymn under your breath, not because you're religious, but because it's rhythmical. You don't talk about your insomnia anymore, not even to your closest friend, because they'll only give you that look, the one that says, "Have you tried not worrying?" As if that's a new idea. As if it never occurred to you to stop overthinking everything. From dinner choices to death dot at some point, you stop fighting it. You stop expecting sleep to arrive. Like a butler with warm slippers and a polite bow. You begin to treat it like a cat, aloof, unpredictable, prone to ignoring you just because. You build a life around its absence. You learn to function in a haze. You master the art of appearing alert while your brain hums static. You keep your hands busy. You smile when spoken to. You learn that society doesn't really care if you're well rested. It only cares if you look like you are. And still, beneath all the rituals and rules and moral gymnastics, the truth hums like a second heartbeat. You are tired. Profoundly, existentially tired. Not just of being awake, but of having to prove. You deserve to sleep. Because sleep, in this world, isn't about biology, it's about virtue. And if you can't do it right, then you must be doing something wrong. Maybe it's time to unlearn everything the etiquette books ever said. Maybe you don't need lavender, or lace, or lettuce. Maybe you just need permission to be a human being, lost in the dark, doing your best not to lose your mind. You rise from bed again, defeated, and shuffle toward the hearth where last night's ashes whisper their own tiny insomnia story. You try not to make noise, God forbid someone else wakes and joins this unwanted party, but the floorboards, traitorous and old, creak like they're in on some joke you're not allowed to laugh at. You pour water into a kettle with the grace of someone who's done it far too often and light the lamp once more. It's strange how the rituals of not sleeping have become more familiar than sleep itself. You could make tea blindfolded. You could list every sound the house makes in order of time and direction. But what you can't do, no matter how hard you try, is fall asleep when the world expects you to. Tonight's strategy. New ritual. Something different, something untested. You've read about it in a recent edition of the Household Oracle, a very serious pamphlet with very serious typesetting, which claims that sleep can be summoned with calming repetition of mind and gesture. The article suggests that boring yourself to sleep is scientifically sound, though scientific in this case seems to mean something between common sense and magical thinking. The example given? Repeating Psalm 121 while smoothing the edge of your blanket for precisely 5 minutes. Another suggestion is listing exports from British colonies in alphabetical order, which, to be fair, might actually work if your brain didn't immediately start turning every name into a moral dilemma. You try something different, counting your breaths. Inhale 1, exhale 1, inhale 2, exhale 2. It works for maybe 10 seconds until you remember the laundry, and the letter you forgot to send, and the fact that you're not entirely sure you locked the back door. And wasn't there a strange noise near the chimney earlier? Probably a squirrel, or a ghost squirrel. You start to imagine the chimney collapse scenario in vivid detail, and abandon breathing in favor of staring blankly at your own hands, which now seem oddly sinister in the flickering light dot. So, what now? Back to bed? No point. You look around the room. A single chair sits near the window. It's not particularly comfortable, but it has the one thing the bed doesn't: novelty. You drag a blanket with you and curl into it like a very tired hermit crab. From here, the city looks like it's holding its breath. The gas lamps outside are still burning, casting a yellowish haze over the cobblestones. It's quiet enough that you can hear the occasional echo of hooves, the faraway mutter of a constable's whistle, the soft drip of rain off a metal gutter. You find yourself oddly soothed. It's not sleep, but it's close. A pause, a breath, a moment where your thoughts slow enough for you to remember that you're not the only one awake in this sleepless empire. Bizarre. Bedtime rituals are more common than people admit. Most households have their quirks, their inherited superstitions, their whispered routines. You remember your grandmother saying she never went to bed without rubbing a spoonful of honey on her temples. Something about warding off nightmares and head colds. Your uncle swears by walking backward into bed. He insists it tricks the devil. A friend of the family swaddles herself in 2 petticoats and lies perfectly still like a corpse to encourage death-like sleep. You don't question it anymore. You've seen people sleep beside onions, under garlet braids, on beds filled with hay, salt, or according to rumor, a thin layer of soil to ground the soul. Historians still argue whether these practices were spiritual, psychological, or just the last gasp of the desperate, but the fact remains, people will do strange things for a chance at rest. And not just poor or eccentric people. The aristocracy had its own brand of midnight madness. Some noble families employed sleep companions, essentially staff trained to monitor your breathing and gently pat your arm if you got twitchy. Others built elaborate mechanical beds that rocked slowly, powered by pulleys and counterweights. One earl reportedly kept a live birdcage near his head, believing the gentle sound of fluttering wings helped lull his mind. You wonder how many servants hated those birds. You imagine the squawking at dawn. It's not restful, it's deranged, and yet these rituals persist. Because when sleep becomes an unreliable visitor, you start to prepare for it like a guest. You make space, you tidy your mind. You set traps, quiet ones, hoping that maybe, this time, it'll stay a little longer. You don't care how absurd it looks. You'd stand on one foot while humming, "God Save the Queen," if someone said it might help. There's a humility in that, almost a holiness. You've learned more about yourself in these hours of non-sleep than in a year's worth of normal daylight. You've learned what your brain clings to, what it invents, what it fears when there's no one left to impress. So tonight, you embrace the ridiculous. You make a tiny shrine on the floor. One candlestick, one worn book, a button from a lost coat, no reason really, just something to focus on. You arrange it like a little spell and sit beside it. You recite a few lines from a poem you half remember from school. Something about the sea or death, or maybe both. And you rock slightly in the chair, not on purpose at first, but because the rhythm feels good. It's not comfort, exactly, but it is presence. You are here, awake, alive, still waiting. Eventually. Your eyes droop. Your thoughts start to repeat themselves. The light flickers. You stretch your legs out and let your head tilt back. It won't last. But maybe you've tricked the night, just for a minute. Maybe you've created a space weird enough, humble enough, sincere enough to invite something like rest. It isn't sleep, but it is sleep adjacent. And that's better than nothing. You drift not fully, but enough to lose track of time. Your neck aches from the angle. Your feet are cold. But your mind is somewhere soft. You're dreaming of a field. Or maybe it's a foggy street. There's something in your hand. A cup, a feather, a key. It doesn't matter. You don't feel the same tight grip of insomnia, that familiar dread. It's still there, hovering, but it's quieter now. Less of a monster, more of a moody roommate. And for once, you don't try to force it. You don't chase sleep like it's a thief. You let it approach at its own strange, reluctant pace. If it comes, it comes. If not, you'll be here anyway. Awake, breathing, whispering nonsense to the dark. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for now. The sun isn't up yet, but the sky has begun to soften from ink black to something resembling the inside of a week-old plum. You've moved back to your bed, not because you think it'll work this time, but because the chair's developed a personality you no longer trust. You lie flat, limbs arranged with surgical precision, as if your body might be more convincing to sleep if it looks like one of those idealized illustrations from a health manual. Hands at sides, face relaxed, spine aligned like you're about to be buried or photographed. The clock ticks on, infuriating and smug. And somewhere down the hall, someone coughs a long, wet exhale of despair that sounds suspiciously like your cousin George. Again, every morning begins like this. Not with rest, but with resignation. Sleep, it seems, is for other people. People with simpler lives. People who haven't read the newspaper. People who aren't being stalked by the godless tempo of Victorian timekeeping. You drag yourself upright and stare at the object that might be your worst enemy, the clock. Its face is innocent, elegant even, with Roman numerals and gold trim. But you know better. This is no timepiece. This is a tyrant, a guilt machine. It marks your failure every minute, reminding you that you're awake when you shouldn't be, and that now you'll be exhausted during the only hour society actually values. You start to hate it a little more every day. And yet, like most Victorians, you cannot escape it. You are ruled by the clock, not just for sleep, but for eating, praying, working, walking, and even dreaming. It's the metronome of your life. And it does not care if you're tired. In earlier centuries, before industrialization, people slept in two phases, first sleep and second sleep, with a period of wakefulness in the middle for prayer, reading, or sneaking around with your neighbors. Cousin. But now, in the mighty age of coal and carriages, this natural rhythm has been declared obsolete. One uninterrupted block of sleep is the new ideal. You're expected to fall asleep quickly, stay asleep, and wake up ready to contribute to the empire. And if you can't do that well, then something must be wrong with you, not the schedule. Not the system, you. Victorian logic in a nutshell. Historians still debate whether this shift in sleep expectations was due to technology, capitalism, or good old-fashioned Protestant guilt. But one thing is certain. Clocks became central to how people viewed health, morality, and worth. Every home had one. Every factory synchronized its whistles to them. Schools rang bells. Churches told hours. Trains demanded exactitude. The famed thing. Human body, once trusted to rise and rest with the sun, was now expected to obey a ticking brass overlord on the mantle. You don't sleep when you're tired. You sleep when the clock says so. Or you try to. This obsession leaks into every aspect of domestic life. Children are trained to rise at 6, eat at 7, study at 8, and be useful by 9. Adults are even worse. The ideal schedule, printed in popular magazines, prescribes precisely 8 hours of sleep, 6 of labor, 3 of leisure, and 1 of moral reflection. You're not sure who wrote this. Probably someone who had a staff of 5 and didn't believe in personal doubt. You've never met anyone who fits this mold, but you pretend to try. Everyone does. That's the game. And so night after night, you lie in bed staring at the clock, bargaining with it. Just 5 hours. 4, 3.5 would be fine. You do mental math constantly, trying to calculate the exact amount of sleep that might still be salvageable. You tell yourself that if you fall asleep by 4:17, you'll have exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes until the coal delivery arrives and sets the dog barking. You start dividing your life into increments of failure. Sleep becomes a math problem you're never smart enough to solve. Some households take this madness to mechanical extremes. Clockwork inventions become popular devices designed to regulate every element of domestic life. You've seen the advertisements, the bedtime reminder, a little contraption that chimes softly and drops lavender oil onto your pillow at precisely 10:15 p.m., or the morning motivator, a terrifying hybrid of alarm bell and shoehorn that ejects the sleeper from bed with the subtlety of cannon fire. There's even a timed prayer box that opens only after sundown, filled with appropriately sleepy psalms and guilt-inducing quotes about sloth. The Victorians may not have invented anxiety, but they certainly gave it accessories. One family down. The road installed a ticking room, where every wall has a clock set to a slightly different time. Supposedly, it trains the mind to sleep through chaos. In reality, it's like trying to nap in a room full of nervous mice. You once visited and left with a migraine and a new fear of Swiss engineering, but the owner swore it worked. He claimed he hadn't had a bad night since 1859. You're not sure you believe him. He blinked too much. Even the architecture gets involved. Bedrooms are designed for maximum compliance. Windows are placed to encourage morning sun. Doors creak on purpose to deter midnight wandering. Beds are positioned to face the clock, a silent witness to your struggle. Some even come with little cubbies beneath the mattress, perfect for storing your regrets or, more realistically, your extra pair of wool socks and that slightly damp copy of On Proper Rest and the Protestant Spirit. Eventually you realize that your entire environment has been shaped not to help you sleep, but to monitor your failure to do so. The clock doesn't offer solutions. It just watches, judging, counting, punishing. You think about smashing it with your slipper. You think about wrapping it in a towel and tossing it out the window like an exorcism. But you don't, because even though you hate it, you also rely on it. It's the only thing that makes sense anymore. It may be cruel, but it's consistent. And so you rise again and make a note in your journal. Another sleepless night. Dreamed of burning the clock. Might try herbal tea again tomorrow, or hypnosis, or giving up entirely. You wind the clock out of habit. The tick resumes, loud in the quiet. You lie back down, eyes fixed on the hands. They don't care about your suffering. They only care about seconds, minutes, hours. They'll keep turning, whether you sleep or not. And somehow, that makes the whole thing feel both tragic and hilariously petty. You sigh, one long exhale into the stale air, and pull the blanket up to your chin. Somewhere miles away, another sleepless person probably just did the same thing. The clocks connect you. A secret society of tired, twitchy, overclocked souls. Not heroes, not victims. Just people, waiting, watching, hoping, and wondering if time was supposed to fix everything. Why did it make you feel even more broken? You've tried lying flat, sideways, fetal, upside down. You've prayed, you've paced. You've boiled your sixth lettuce leaf into something barely legal and sipped it with the grim determination of someone doing penance. And now, at a very unfriendly hour known only to crows and criminals, you do the one thing your grandmother warned you never to do. You flip the pillow. It's cool on the underside, briefly soothing, and that small comfort lures you into false security until you remember the folklore. You stare at the ceiling, wide-eyed, as the tailies come slithering back. Flipping your pillow after midnight is a guaranteed way to attract the dead. Not in a romantic Victorian ghost story way. More in a woke up and grandma's spirit is sitting on your chest muttering about the price of fish kind of way. Welcome to the world of supernatural sleep anxiety, where dreams are messages, furniture is haunted. And insomnia isn't just a medical condition, it's a spiritual vulnerability in the Victorian imagination. The night wasn't just a natural pause between days, it was a liminal realm, teeming with moral hazards and metaphysical weirdness. To be awake while the world slept was to be exposed, unguarded, spiritually naked. And if you were awake too often, well, people might start asking questions. Are you being punished, visited, possessed? In a society steeped in both Christian piety and old European superstition, sleep disturbances weren't merely inconvenient, they were suspicious. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in genuine religious terror or were simply social tools to keep people quiet and compliant after dark. Either way, the effect was the same. Insomnia made you vulnerable, not just to exhaustion, but to gossip, judgment, and, apparently, ghosts. You remember stories told in low tones around fire grates of women who heard voices whispering lullabies in languages no one spoke, of children who talked in their sleep and revealed family secrets they couldn't possibly know, of men who woke with scratches on their arms and no memory of how they got there. The explanation? Spirit visitations. Or, if you were less lucky, demonic oppression. There's even a pamphlet in your cousin's church library titled When the Devil Walks by Moonlight, which, among other things, blames restless sleep on improper posture, foreign music, and spiritual sloth. You tried reading it once. Made it halfway through before realizing you'd never relax again. Sleep was considered sacred and therefore dangerous. In the Bible, dreams were where God delivered messages. In folklore, they were where witches harvested your essence. Either way, sleep was a battleground. So if you weren't sleeping, it meant something was off. Maybe your soul was troubled. Maybe your house was cursed. Maybe your pillow was placed on a ley line, and the energy of ancient burial grounds was keeping you alert. Don't laugh. People truly believed this stuff. Entire rituals evolved just to protect the sleeper. Sage under the bed, iron nails at the windowsill, shoes turned backward beside the door to confuse malicious spirits. If you're thinking this sounds like overkill, you've clearly never been chased through your dreams by a 19th century concept of sin. You lie very still now, reluctant to move. You glance around your room and take inventory of all the potential portals and protections. The crucifix above the bed, the sprig of rosemary tucked behind the curtain, the old silver coin under your mattress, a family charm to calm the shadow men, though no one really remembers what that means. Your sister used to swear by drawing a circle of flour on her pillow. She stopped when she woke up one night and found a perfect handprint in it. Your mother still won't discuss that incident. Even sleepwalking was treated with equal parts fear and fascination. If you'd ever been caught wandering the house in your nightdress, eyes blank, feet silent, you'd be bundled into bed and prayed over until sunrise. Some saw it as a sign of divine communication. Others thought it was proof you were under a curse, or worse, in league with something unholy. You once heard of a man in Devon who was chained to his bed nightly because his sleepwalking had led him to draw strange symbols on the walls and speak in reversed Latin. The town priest declared it a clear case of nocturnal heresy. You're not sure what that even means, but it doesn't sound restful. And dreams, dear God, the dreams. Victorians cataloged them like scientists, believing each one held coded messages from your subconscious, your soul, or your sins. Dreamed of water? That's sorrow coming. Teeth falling out? Your vein and it's catching up with you. Flying? Pride? Snakes? Temptation? Public nudity? You've offended the angels. There were books, charts, and lectures devoted to interpreting dreams, and none of them were comforting. Modern interpretations might suggest your brain sorting data. Victorians, however, were sure you were being judged. Even your subconscious wasn't safe from moral scrutiny. And if you dreamt of someone who had died recently, you were to stay silent about it. Speaking the dream aloud might invite their spirit back. That was the rule. Break it, and you risked nightly visitations, or so said your aunt, who once claimed she saw a ghostly dog outside her window every night for a month after telling a story about her deceased milkman. You're not even sure why she was dreaming of the milkman in the first place. That's another story. You lie there, half fearful and half bemused, wondering how many of your own nights have been shaped by these ideas. How many tiny rituals you've performed without thinking. How much of your insomnia is biological, and how much is inherited fear. Maybe you sleep lightly because some ancient part of your brain believes it's safer. Maybe it's not insomnia. Maybe it's watchfulness, generational hypervigilance, the evolutionary echo of sleeping with one eye open because something out there, be it ghost, sin, or a metaphor for capitalism, might get you. You try not to let the thoughts spiral. You return to the pillow, flip it again, this time defiantly. You whisper a small apology to the spirits just in case. You adjust the blanket, ensuring your feet are covered, another ancient superstition. Exposed feet were said to invite wandering souls and cold drafts. Either way, unpleasant. You slow your breathing. Not because it helps, but because it's something to do. You count backward from 20. You imagine each number as a candle extinguishing. The room is dim. The world is quiet. For a moment, you think you might actually slip away, and then the house creaks. Loud. Sudden. A groan from the hallway, like someone leaning too hard on an old banister. Your eyes snap open. Your heart ticks up. You tell yourself it's the wind, the wood settling, the echoes of plumbing in a city that was never really designed for sleep. But part of you, just a sliver, believes it could be something else. Something listening, something ancient, something that's been watching you flip your pillow all night with mild ghostly disapproval. You close your eyes again. You tell yourself it's nothing. You promise not to tell anyone about this. Not the creak, not the whisper, not the dream you almost had. Because in Victorian households, some things are better left unspoken. Especially if you ever want to sleep again. The ceiling is beginning to glow faintly with the suggestion of morning, and you're still awake. Your eyelids ache from the weight of staying open too long, but your brain is a noisy pub at closing time, people leaving, chairs scraping, thoughts shouting over each other in slurred metaphors. You try to remember the last time you slept through the night and come up blank. Maybe it was years ago, maybe never. You've stopped trusting your own memories. Everything blurs when the nights stretch on like this, long and elastic, like time itself is rubber, and you're being stretched along it with no end in sight. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you know this isn't normal. But here's the catch. In your world, this kind of sleeplessness is entirely too common. Especially among the well-dressed, overfed elite. You live in an era where aristocrats, those people with 3 surnames and more waistcoats than problems, cannot sleep either. In fact, insomnia has become almost fashionable in certain circles. If you're poor and can't sleep, you're weak. If you're rich and can't sleep, you're sensitive, refined, perhaps even a bit tragic in a Byron kind of way. This class-based double standard is one of the Victorians' favorite games. The same affliction that damns a factory worker to. Ridicule becomes, in an upper-crust drawing room, a subject of theatrical sighs and fan-fluttering lament. "Oh, I haven't slept a wink," Lady something-something murmurs over tea. "Too many thoughts, I suppose." You'd like to tell her it's probably the 4 servings of pheasant pâté she inhaled, but you nod sympathetically instead. Because the rich have made even sleeplessness into a performance. You think of the sleeping arrangements of the upper-class ornate canopy beds with imported linens, foot warmers carved from ivory, personal nightmaids standing by with lavender. Compresses. Their bedrooms look like the antechambers of minor royalty. Every piece of furniture engraved with symbols and passed-down curses. The curtains alone could fund a small rebellion. And yet, despite all that comfort and quiet, they're awake too. Staring at ceilings, wringing their hands, drinking odd liquids out of gold-rimmed glasses. The difference is, when they don't sleep, they call it melancholy or a delicate nervousness. You call it what it is. Being trapped in a cycle that doesn't care how clean your sheets are. Historians still argue whether aristocratic insomnia was genuine or exaggerated, a sort of performative affliction designed to show just how intellectual and emotionally complex the upper class believed themselves to be. A bored baroness with too much time and not enough chores might describe her insomnia in great detail, comparing it to a misty field or the ache of unspoken poetry. Meanwhile, the maid washing her nightdress is surviving on 4 hours of sleep and a stale biscuit. But nobody's writing odes to her exhaustion. You recall a visit to an estate where the master of the house, a pale man with the nervous energy of a startled rabbit, claimed to suffer from chronic upper brain activity. That's not a diagnosis. That's just a verbose way of saying he worries too much. His doctor had prescribed complete silence after sunset, along with a diet of fish, soft bread, and no exposure to the color red. Why red? Nobody knows. Apparently, crimson upholstery was sending his nervous system into overdrive. The servants walked on eggshells. Red curtains were replaced with beige. Tomatoes were banned. Even apples had to be peeled. And yet, he still didn't sleep. His sighs echoed through the halls. You heard one personally from 4 rooms away. What these well-appointed insomniacs did have, though, was time. Time to journal their condition. Time to order new bed linens. Write dramatic letters to friends, consult mesmerists. They could afford to treat their lack of sleep as a lifestyle choice. You have to wake up soon and chop firewood. Their sleeplessness is curated. Yours is just cumulative failure. They are given nightcaps embroidered with initials. You wrap a scarf around your head to keep warm. They call for warm milk stirred with rose water. You're still burping up beef. Tea from 2 hours ago. And yet you envy them. Not because of the comfort or the luxury, or even the access to prescription-grade laudanum. You envy them because their sleeplessness is allowed to exist without shame. No one tells them they're lazy. No one hints they might be morally corrupt. No one suggests their tired eyes mean they've failed to live up to their potential. Instead, they get concern. They get sympathy. They get the benefit of the doubt. You once read a lady's diary where she described her insomniac nights as moments of poetic solitude, wherein the soul wanders the garden of its own making. You wanted to throw the book out the window. If your soul has a garden, it's full of weeds, crows, and someone playing the banjo at 2 a.m., you don't get solitude. You get 4 people snoring in different keys, and a neighbor with a cat who thinks it's a rooster. Of course, even among the elite, not all sleep deprivation is equal. Men and women are still treated differently. An aristocratic man who can't sleep is an overburdened intellectual. An aristocratic woman is at risk of being labeled hysterical. So while men get prescribed fishing holidays and cigars, women get rest cures, weeks of confinement, no books, no conversation, and meals fed by spoon like an invalid. They lie in bed, not because it helps, but because someone decided they're too fragile to handle their own minds. You've heard stories of these rest cures. Women returned home more broken than before. Some never spoke again. Some became quietly angry. Some started sketching grotesque images on the backs of dinner menus. None of them were truly cured, just silenced. It was the fashionable thing to do. Package a woman's exhaustion as aesthetic fragility. Frame it like art. Sell it back to society as the cost of brilliance. You wonder if this whole sleep mess was never meant to be solved. Just commodified, romanticized, pinned down in the language of affliction and sold at a premium to those who could afford it. While the rest of you, the maids, the miners, the milliners just kept trudging on, tired and expected to be grateful. The clock strikes again. You've lost count. The sky is paler now. The day begins soon. You can hear the first cart on the cobblestones, the soft clink of milk bottles being delivered. Life continues, with or without your permission. You lie back, staring at the beams above, and think of all the people waking up who never really went to sleep. Some in fine silk beds, some on straw pallets, but all bound by the same question. Will tonight be different? Probably not. But we pretend anyway. You're not even pretending to sleep anymore. The pretense has dissolved, like sugar in tepid tea, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of another wasted night. You're perched at the window now, watching the gas lamps flicker in their dying hours. They burn like tired eyelids low, uncertain, fading at the edges. The light they give is more impression than illumination, and it turns the cobblestones into a stage set for ghosts and regrets. You don't see anyone out there. Just shadows, moving without source, a breeze rustling the rubbish, and the occasional shape that could be a cat or a drunk, or your imagination. At this hour, you don't trust your senses. They're dulled, softened by exhaustion. Like old tools used too often and sharpened too rarely. It's easy to stare too long. The longer you look, the more the gaslight seems to shift. 1 second, it's steady, the next it flutters like a dying firefly. You blink hard, wondering if it's the light or your eyes. Then again, this entire city is a kaleidoscope at night. Victorian London after midnight doesn't sleep so much as twitch. Gaslight plays tricks, refracts through dirty glass and fog, casting shapes where none should be. You've seen entire silhouettes vanish when someone opened a curtain. You've seen street lamps pulse as if alive, as if breathing. And always that buzz faint constant, the hissing whisper of flame caged behind glass, lighting the streets not for safety, but surveillance. The gaslight era was meant to civilize the city. That's what they said. Bring order to chaos. Keep the night at bay. But here's the joke. It didn't make people feel safer. It just made them feel watched. Sleep, once guarded by natural darkness and silence, was now flooded with a permanent twilight. Historians still debate whether gaslighting lengthened the working day out of economic necessity or sheer cultural ambition. What's certain is that the human body didn't adjust well. Circadian rhythms, though they didn't have that name yet, were utterly scrambled. People stayed up longer, worked longer, worried longer, and the light didn't calm them. It just made their insomnia more visible. You lean against the window frame, cheek pressed to cold glass, and remember the first time the gas lamps arrived on your street. There was a crowd. People cheered, children clapped, even the dogs barked. With something like excitement. The city had promised more light, more safety, more modernity. What it delivered was a sleepless glow that crept through shutters, peeled paint off doors, and turned every bedroom into a shadow play. The glow never left. You couldn't stop it. You learned to live with it, like you learned to live with background noise, with indigestion, with your cousin's opinions. It's always there, just enough to keep your mind alert. And that's the real crime of gaslight insomnia. Not that it prevents sleep directly, but that it creates the perfect stage for thought. Relentless, looping, ceaseless thought. You start thinking of things you haven't considered in years. Old debts, past arguments. Whether that cough last week was a cough or a curse. Whether you left the kettle on. Whether you're a good person. Whether anyone is. You run through entire conversations that haven't happened yet. Invent insults. Prepare defenses. You become a one-person courtroom drama starring insomnia as the judge, jury, and very tired audience. The flicker outside intensifies briefly, as if the lamp is aware it's being watched. You wonder who else is awake, peering out at the same wavering light. Is someone across the alley watching you watch them? Are they also wondering if they've lost their mind? You'd wave, but that would confirm it. So you don't. You just sit, still and quiet, like a cat trapped in its own skull. You remember reading about the early days of gaslighting, when people were warned not to look directly at the lamps. Avoid the flame, one pamphlet advised, lest your eyes become unsettled. What a phrase. Unsettled eyes. You think you have those now. Eyes that see things too clearly in the dark. Not ghosts, exactly, but traces. Shadows of choices. Echoes of doubt. You blink and rub your temples, trying to push them back. It doesn't help that the city is louder at night than it ought to be. Even with most people asleep, there's always motion. Always sound. The uneven clop of a single horse pulling something. Too heavy. A distant scream you convince yourself was laughter. Somewhere, water drips in a pipe that was never meant to carry water at all. In the distance, the soft grind of wheels on rails. A night train moving through neighborhoods where no one wants to be awake, but everyone is. London is a beast that breathes through its bones, restless, hungry, and utterly unwilling to pause. And still, despite all this sensory chaos, the gas lamps shine on. They've become a symbol now, though not the one they were meant to be. Not safety, not innovation, but exposure. A constant reminder that your struggle isn't private. The light's always watching. Every toss, every turn, every time you get up to sip more bad tea or rearrange your blankets for the 5th time. In this light, there's no real privacy. The city knows you're awake. It doesn't care. But it knows you think fleetingly about smashing the lamp outside your window. You imagine the glass shattering, the hiss of the extinguished flame, the brief delicious darkness that would follow. But someone would hear, someone would tell, and the city would simply replace it the next day, brighter and closer than before. That's the thing about gaslight, it never really leaves. It just waits, flickering out. Eventually, you leave the window. Your breath has fogged the pain, leaving behind the faintest imprint of your face, a ghost of a ghost. You return to bed because there's nowhere else to go. You lie down and face the wall this time, letting the light fall on your back instead of your eyes. You tell yourself it makes a difference. It doesn't. The clock ticks again. Morning creeps in too slowly to be helpful, too quickly to be kind. You haven't slept, but you've seen the night through. Again, that has to count for something, right? Maybe not in health, not in productivity, but in perseverance. You've outlasted the gaslight, for now. It's morning now, or at least what passes for it in your part of the city. The gray light trickles in slowly, as if even the sun isn't convinced it should be here. You haven't slept, obviously. Your mouth is dry, your neck is stiff. There's an odd pressure behind your left eye that might be an ache, or a warning, or just your brain trying to push itself out through the socket in protest. You stretch reluctantly, and feel every vertebra complain like a line of underpaid clerks. Another night gone. Another day begins. You sit up. It's a slow, dignified process, like an aging steam engine rattling to life. Your legs dangle over the edge of the bed, toes grazing a floor that is somehow both freezing and sticky. The kind of stickiness that raises questions you're too tired to ask. In the poorer quarters of London, this is the normal wake-up. No gentle chirping of birds. No sunbeams kissing your face. Just the metallic clatter of a dust cart outside, a baby crying 3 floors down, and the unmistakable sound of someone trying to cook oats over a flame that refuses to cooperate. You know this routine because you live it. And if you didn't sleep last night, well, neither did half your neighbors. Not because they're cursed or emotional or too artistic for their own good, but because sleep, in this world, is a luxury item. And luxuries are rationed, especially in the slums. Historians still argue whether Victorian working class insomnia was caused more by physical conditions or psychological strain. But they all agree on one thing: it was everywhere. A common affliction. A tiredness baked into the architecture. You didn't need a ghost or a troubled conscience to keep you up. Just a leaking roof, a shared bed, and a baby with rickets. Or, more likely, 5 babies. One of which isn't yours, but screams as if you personally offended its ancestors. In tenement housing, sleep is something you queue for. If you're lucky, you have a corner of the room to yourself, maybe a pallet or a straw mattress with slightly fewer fleas than last month. If you're not, you're in a hot bed setup where multiple people take shifts sleeping in the same bed. One sleeps while the other works the night shift. Then they switch. Bodies cycling through the same linens, the same tired dreams, the same low-grade despair. It's not sleep, it's rotation. It's biological musical chairs with no music and no chairs. Your room is filled with sound. Not the kind of sound that lulls, but the kind that keeps you on edge. A toddler crying. A neighbor yelling at a wall. The groan of water pipes doing their best impression of a dying sea monster. Someone coughs deep and long and wet, same cough you heard yesterday and the day before. It doesn't stop. You start wondering whether it's actually a person or just the house clearing its throat. Either way, it's a lullaby from hell. You boil water, slowly, because the kettle is dented and the flame is moody. You make weak tea. You add sugar, or pretend to. You tell yourself it helps. It doesn't, but it's a gesture. And gestures matter when you've lost count of how long you've been pretending to be fine. You sit and stare at nothing. Maybe a crack in the wall, maybe the ghost of a cockroach. There's a comfort in stillness, even if it's heavy and damp and vaguely judgmental. You think of the neighbors, the ones you know are up. The old woman who sweeps the stairwell at 6 every morning like it's a religious rite. The butcher's apprentice who hasn't smiled since the Crimean War. The 3 sisters who braid each other's hair in silence and look like they've been 80 since birth. Everyone here is tired. That's the one constant. Doesn't matter how many spoons of broth you drink or how many prayers you whisper. The city is built on fatigue. The kind of fatigue that seeps into your bones, your conversations, even your posture. Nobody stands straight here. Everyone slouches toward the next task, the next shift, the next obligation. Children are no better. You'd think they'd sleep, what with their tiny limbs and general obliviousness. But no, they're restless too. Jolted awake by noise, by nightmares, by hunger. You remember trying to sleep as a child wedged between 2 siblings, blanketed in other people's breath. You remember the fear of coughing too loudly, of waking someone else, of being blamed for the chain reaction that followed. You learned to lie still, learned to silence your own needs, learned that sleep, like food and quiet, was something too. Be negotiated. Of course, none of this shows up in the respectable journals. Those tend to focus on the nervous afflictions of the refined. Which is funny, because there's nothing more nervy than trying to sleep in a single room, with 6 people and 1 working window that doesn't open all the way. Your nerves aren't delicately frayed. They're practically shredded. You head outside. The street is already waking. Smoke drifts from chimney pots. Boots slap against the cobblestones. Someone yells at a horse, which has clearly done something unforgivable, like breathing too loudly. The city yawns. You don't. You're past yawning. Yawning suggests potential energy. You're running on echo. You pass a few shops. There's signs. Worn, their windows grimy. The pharmacy will open in an hour, offering its usual shelf of vaguely labeled remedies. Powders, tinctures, teas. You've tried most. 1 bottle promised dreamless slumber. It gave you 2 hours of vivid hallucinations and a rash shaped like Belgium. Still, people line up for it. Because sleep, even bad sleep, is a kind of magic. The kind no one here can quite afford. That you see a man asleep on a stoop, his mouth open, hat pulled low, a newspaper over his lap. You envy him, deeply. Then you remember he's the night watchman for the butcher's shop, and he's probably had 3 hours in 2 days. His sleep isn't peace, it's collapse. He'll be up again in 10 minutes, bleary-eyed and swearing. But for now he rests. You watch him like you're studying a rare bird. Eventually, you return home. Back to the room. Back to the cot. You lie down. Not because you expect sleep, but because there's nowhere else to go. The baby is quieter now. The cough is fading. You stare at the ceiling. The plaster peels like sunburned skin. You imagine pulling it off bit by bit until the whole roof opens to the sky. Maybe then you'll sleep. Maybe not, but at least you'd have some fresh air. You're standing in front of a stranger who's swinging a small brass pendulum an inch from your nose, and for the first time in weeks, you're genuinely curious whether this might actually work. Not because you believe in it, not entirely, but because you've tried everything else. Lettuce tea, beef broth, Bible verses, clock smashing. And yet, here you are, awake, again. So when someone suggests hypnosis, you don't laugh. You book an appointment, dress carefully, and walk 30 minutes to a narrow building that smells like mildew and peppermint. Because even if it's nonsense that offers hope. And at this point, hope is your drug of choice. The room is dim, intentionally so. Heavy curtains block the windows. The air is still. The hypnotist, a man with hair slicked back so tightly it looks painful, greets you with a slow nod. He doesn't speak much, just gestures for you to sit in. The high-backed chair, which creaks in disapproval as you settle in. Then the session begins. No fanfare, no chant. Just the pendulum swinging gently, rhythmically, as his voice murmurs soft commands. You are calm, he says. Your limbs are heavy. Sleep is near. You want to scoff. But something in you hesitates, because the truth is, you want to believe. Desperately. Hypnosis, or mesmerism as the Victorians like to call it, was once treated as a curiosity, a parlor trick. But by the mid-19th century, it had gained traction as a legitimate therapy, at least in some circles. Historians still argue whether mesmerism was medical breakthrough, spiritual movement, or glorified placebo. Some believe the practitioner was channeling animal magnetism, a mysterious force that realigned your body's internal currents. Others saw it as a purely psychological state, a form of controlled suggestion. Either way, people came in droves. Especially the sleepless. You've read the stories. People cured of headaches, stutters, bad habits. One woman supposedly slept 12 hours straight after a single session. Another claimed her insomnia was a ghost that left her body during trance. It sounds absurd until you're on night 30 of zero rest, and your reflection looks like it wants to fight you. Suddenly, the absurd starts to feel like a reasonable. Gamble. The hypnotist's voice is steady. He speaks of waves of drifting clouds, of heavy velvet curtains falling over your thoughts. You try to follow. You really do. But your mind keeps interrupting. What if this doesn't work? It whispers. What if you're too broken to fix? You shift in your seat. The hypnotist frowns, but doesn't stop. He tells you to relax your hands. You realize you've been gripping the arms of the chair. So tightly your knuckles are white, you loosen. You breathe. And for a brief, flickering second, you feel something. A lightness, a lull. Not quite sleep, not quite trance, but a dip. Like your brain has paused its eternal sprint to somewhere, and is now floating, just slightly, above the noise. It lasts for maybe a minute, then the noise returns. The thoughts, the tick of the wall clock, the itch in your knee. Your back, still tired. Still the session ends. The hypnotist removes the pendulum and places it on the desk with reverence. He asks how you feel. You shrug. Better? Worse? The same? Hard to tell. He says it may take several sessions. That your spiritual alignment is deeply tangled. You nod. Pay. Leave. Walk back through the foggy streets trying to decide if you've just participated in healing or theater. That night, you try to recreate the rhythm. You hang a spoon from a string and swing it gently before your eyes. You whisper affirmations to yourself like a sleep-deprived monk. You are calm. You are weightless. Sleep is near. You feel ridiculous. You continue anyway. Because ridiculous is nothing new to you now. Your whole nightly routine has become a montage of hopeful absurdities. If someone told you standing on one leg while humming a sea shanty would help, you'd probably do it. Dignity is the first casualty of chronic insomnia. Still, you can't deny the appeal of hypnosis. The idea that your brain this chaotic, twitchy mess of fears and lists and unfinished conversations can be tamed by suggestion. It's like imagining a lion trained to purr. Victorians were fascinated by this. They held public demonstrations in theaters, where sleep-deprived volunteers would slump over like puppets with their strings cut. Mesmerists were minor celebrities. Some were treated like prophets, others like magicians. One man in Manchester claimed to put people to sleep with his eyes alone. Another toured with a portable mesmerism tent, promising dreamless rest for $1 a minute. Of course there were skeptics. Plenty. Scientists wrote angry essays. Doctors warned about brain damage. Religious leaders feared spiritual corruption. What if opening yourself to hypnosis meant opening yourself to possession? What if your soul drifted too far and didn't come back? Some churches outright banned the practice. Others, more progressive, tried to baptize it as a medical tool. Either way, it remained fringe. But fringe, in your world, is just another word for hope with bad PR. You lie in bed now, staring at the ceiling, one hand rhythmically tapping your thigh in time with the memory of that swinging pendulum. You're not hypnotized. You're not even relaxed. But you're engaged. Your thoughts are tethered to something. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the act of creating a structure for the chaos is more soothing than the promise of actual rest. You imagine your thoughts like birds. Panicked, pecking, constantly flapping. The hypnotist tried to cage them, line them up on a perch. He failed, but you remember the attempt, the softness of his voice, the rhythm, the quiet. It wasn't sleep, but it was something better than panic. And you realize that's what you're chasing. Not just unconsciousness, but peace. A moment, however brief, where the mind isn't clawing at itself, where the breath comes easy, where you're not performing, not fixing, not failing, just existing. Even if it comes from a man in a waistcoat waving jewelry in your face. Flip your pillow again, always again, and close your eyes. You imagine the pendulum, the swing, left, right, left, right. You whisper, not to a doctor or a spirit or a god, but to yourself. You are calm, you are still. Sleep is near. It isn't, but you'll keep swinging anyway. You thought hypnosis was weird until you met Dr. Pritchard, the man who suggested, with full medical authority and a straight face, that mild electrocution might solve your problem. Not painful, he assured you, as if that were the main issue. Just a slight stimulation to reorient the nervous system's rhythm. You nodded slowly, because at this point you've heard it all. You've ingested boiled lettuce, counted breaths, begged ghosts, and watched a pendulum for so long you saw it in your dreams, which was ironic, considering you hadn't actually been dreaming. So when a respected Victorian physician says, "We'll just run a low current through your legs," you don't scream. You roll up your trousers. The apparatus is a horrifying tangle of wires, brass dials, and something that looks suspiciously like a cheese grater. It hums, it clicks, it vibrates faintly. Dr. Pritchard positions your feet on 2 copper plates and adjusts a dial with the solemnity of a priest lighting incense. You may feel a tingling, he says. You do. Then more than tingling. Your toes twitch involuntarily, like they're trying to leave your body for someplace with more common sense. You clench your jaw. He beams. Excellent response, he says. The nerves are very receptive. You wonder if receptive is medical code for defenseless. Electrotherapy, like mesmerism, was one of those Victorian cure-alls that exploded in popularity before anyone really understood how the nervous system worked. Historians still debate whether it helped anyone or just startled them into silence. The logic was simple. Insomnia was a failure of the nerves, and electricity was the language of the nerves, so if you jolted the body just right, maybe it would remember how to sleep. This was the age of invention. After all, telegraphs, light bulbs, mechanized everything. So why not mechanize rest? In clinics across London, electrosleep treatments became all the rage. Some used hand-cranked generators. Others relied on galvanic batteries imported from dubious laboratories. You've seen ads promising instant relief for sleepless women and gentle rejuvenation for overworked minds, all illustrated with oddly serene people sitting in armchairs while wires snake from their skulls. They look peaceful. You suspect they're actors, or corpses. Your own session lasts 10 minutes. You twitch, you sweat. Your left foot develops a temporary vendetta against your right knee. When it ends, Dr. Pritchard hands you a biscuit and tells you not to walk too quickly, as your electrical harmony is still adjusting. You float out of the clinic like a stunned moth, more confused than cured, but marginally calmer. Whether that's the electricity or the biscuit, you're not sure. That night, you lie in bed replaying the sensation. Buzzing, humming, That strange clarity you felt for a few minutes after the quiet that wasn't sleep, but something adjacent. Maybe electrotherapy is just another ridiculous Victorian experiment. But maybe, just maybe, there's something to it. Your nerves, after all, haven't been still in weeks. Maybe they needed to be shocked into remembering how to relax. So, being you try to recreate it. Not the full experience. You don't own a battery-powered sleep machine, thank God. But something similar. You drag your foot across the carpet, feel the static prickle. You tap a fork against the brass bedpost, try to imagine a current flowing. You even touch the handle of the coal scuttle and pretend it's pulsing with therapeutic energy. You're not proud of this, but you're out of options. You remember reading about one woman in Edinburgh who slept only after being gently zapped in her elbows for a fortnight. Another man claimed he could only fall asleep if his ears were wired to opposite corners of the room, creating what he called a nervous bridge. These aren't jokes. These were published in journals. People genuinely believed that electricity, if applied with just enough delicacy and drama, could fix anything. Toothaches, laziness, female opinions. The Victorians were shockingly enthusiastic about shocking people. Of course, not everyone approved. Many physicians warned against overstimulation of the cerebral tissue, claiming that too much electricity could reverse your sleep cycle entirely or induce hallucinations of owls. Religious critics were even more dramatic, insisting that artificial manipulation of the body's energy bordered on playing God. One bishop declared it the devil's tickle. You'd pay to see that sermon. But while the upper crust debated ethics and theology, the tired masses just wanted results. Sleep now, regret later. You keep experimenting. You try placing hot water bottles at your feet, then cold ones, then switching between them. You press your forehead against the window pane and whisper nonsense in Morse code, just in case your brain needs tapping instead of zapping. You even sleep with a copper spoon under your tongue one night. That one doesn't end well. You wake up with a metallic taste and a small chip in your tooth. You try not to think about it, but still, there's something about the idea resetting your nerves like clockwork. It appeals to you. The body as a machine, the mind as a circuit. Sleep as the moment when the current finally flows right. You start thinking of your thoughts as electricity, short-circuiting, arcing, lighting up synapses with the wrong kind of fire. Maybe you've been living in a power surge for too long. Maybe the insomnia isn't spiritual or moral or emotional. Maybe it's just a wiring issue. Of course, you can't test this theory without the proper equipment. And Dr. Pritchard charges more than your weekly wages for a single jolt. So you return to your usual toolkit: lettuce, silence, and pure stubbornness. But you hold on to the idea that somewhere in your bones there's a switch, a reset button. Something that, if triggered just right, could bring you back to yourself. You wonder how many other people lie awake thinking the same thing, wondering if maybe they're not broken, just misaligned. You lie back, let the memory of that humming current wash over you. You imagine it flowing gently through your veins, calming the tremors, smoothing the noise. It doesn't put you to sleep, but it gives you something to focus on that isn't despair. That's something, at least. And as you drift slowly, not towards sleep, but towards stillness, you promise yourself you'll keep trying. Even if it means more wires, more dials, more biscuit bribing appointments with men who think your soul can be rebooted. Because in this era of progress and pride and perpetual motion, maybe sleep isn't a natural right anymore. Maybe it's a thing we have to chase with machines and metaphors and very, very cautious optimism. Tonight, you try something different. Not a potion, not a jolt, not a whisper of sacred scripture or a lettuce-scented ritual. You try writing it out, not because it's advised, not because some reputable doctor with spectacles and a 6-syllable name recommended it, but because you've run out of things to do with your hands, and you can't pace forever without falling through the floor. So you reach for a notebook, thin, frayed, half-used, and start scribbling whatever comes to mind. You don't censor it. You don't try to be poetic. You just spill. Thoughts, memories, shapes of dreams you almost had. You write like your brain is a faulty pipe, and the ink is the only way to keep it from bursting. You call it a dream journal, though most of it is nonsense. But in Victorian times, nonsense sometimes passed for science, or soul-searching, or entertainment. And right, now you'd take any of those. Victorians loved dream diaries. Not because they believed dreams were random flickers of brain static, but because they thought dreams were coded messages, clues from your body, your soul, or God. Historians still debate whether this obsession with dream documentation was therapeutic or just a product of the era's performative introspection. Either way, middle-class parlors were full of delicate journals labeled visions of the night or sleep thoughts. People hosted dream salons, sharing last night's strange narrative over crumpets and too sweet tea. You've read accounts of these gatherings. A woman dreaming of bluebells interpreted as fertility. A man dreaming of sinking ships was told he needed to reconsider his investments. Dream analysis wasn't just a hobby. It was an identity. You, however, are not in the salon. You're hunched over your tiny table in a chilly room, scratching with a blunt pencil, trying not to cry from sheer inertia. You write down fragments. A hallway with no doors. A teacup filled with ash. Your old schoolteacher melting into the wallpaper. You don't know what it means. You don't care. But it's something to do. Something to anchor you to the hours that no longer feel real. Because when the nights stretch too long, you lose the sense that anything matters. Writing, at least, proves you existed through it. Eventually, the journal becomes something more. A companion, a confessional. A chronicle of all the nights you didn't sleep and all the ridiculous things you tried. One page describes the dream you didn't have. Another lists all the ways you've attempted to trick your body into unconsciousness. The fifth cup of chamomile. The cold tile against your cheek. The time you laid in bed imagining yourself as a sheep just to see if that helped the count. You started the journal hoping to unlock your subconscious. Now you realize you're just documenting your descent. And then you remember, Lewis Carroll did this. Or something like it. He kept notebooks of absurdities, dreams, logic puzzles, and nonsense verse, all the ingredients that eventually became Wonderland. Victorian society may have prided itself on order, but its dreamers were loud, strange, and sometimes wildly influential. Carroll, Edward Lear, Christina Rossetti all wrote works filled with surreal landscapes and logic-defying creatures that mirrored the sleep-deprived mental state of their time. Nonsense was not only acceptable, it was art, a rebellion against the tyranny of the ticking clock. You flip to a fresh page and try writing a poem. It starts badly, gets worse. Rhymes sleep with bleep, which isn't even a Victorian word, but that's fine. No one will see this. Or maybe someone will long after you're gone, and they'll interpret your terrible verse as the tortured genius of a misunderstood visionary. Or they'll just laugh. Either way, you're okay with it. Because at least now your insomnia has a voice. In your dream journal, if that's what we're still calling it, you start cataloging patterns. Every night you sleep less than 3 hours, you seem to remember more details. On nights when you drink something herbal, your handwriting gets erratic. When you try writing in complete darkness with a stub of charcoal, your thoughts feel sharper, more urgent. You begin to treat the journal as data, a study. You're not just suffering, you're observing. And observation is the first step toward understanding. Maybe you even attempt to interpret your own entries. Last night's page mentioned a staircase made of fingernails. Disturbing. Maybe it means you're anxious about decay. Or hygiene, or both. You sketch it, add shading. It looks worse in graphite than it did in your mind. But it's real now. That's the point. You're not just haunted. You're documenting the haunting. Some nights, the journal devolves into pure nonsense. A shopping list for a dream you didn't finish. A letter to a version of yourself that only exists between 2 and 4 a.m. Recipes that include ingredients like a whisper of moonlight and the shadow of a bell. It feels absurd. Feels like you're losing touch. But in a strange way, it also feels like reclaiming something. If you can't have sleep, you can at least have creativity. Madness as a consolation prize. Victorian literature is full of this. Trope the sleepless genius, the night wanderer who finds art in anguish. You never thought you'd end up in that category. You were aiming for stable, functional, unremarkable. But now as you scribble another half-rhyme about a haunted wardrobe, you think, maybe the Victorians had a point. Maybe nonsense isn't failure. Maybe it's resistance. Maybe it's survival. Of course. You don't tell anyone about the journal. Not your family. Not your doctor. Especially not the priest. You can't risk someone reading it and deciding you've gone too far. There were people in this era who lost their reputations, or worse, because their writing was too strange, too personal, too resistant to moral interpretation. So you keep your scribbles hidden, folded inside a loose floorboard under your bed. You read them by candlelight, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, always grateful that for a few hours your hands are moving and your mind is slightly less sharp-edged. And then, one night, something strange happens. You fall asleep mid-sentence. You wake hours later with your head on the desk, drool soaking through a page that reads, "The teacup smiled but said nothing." You slept, not long, not well, but it was sleep. You blink, stunned, unsure whether to celebrate or cry. You choose both. Then you write about it. Because that's what you do now. You are the chronicler of your own collapse. The historian of a mind that refuses to rest. And while you can't cure your insomnia, you can at least make sure it's remembered, page by page, word by word. Until someday, someone finds your notebook and says, "Whoever wrote this was awake for a reason." It starts with a nap, a real one. The kind you don't expect, that ambush you while you're sitting upright, clutching a half-written grocery list or staring blankly at a cobweb vibrating in the corner. Your head drops, jerks up, drops again. A slow surrender, not planned, not earned, but real. You wake up 15 minutes later disoriented and oddly ashamed, like you just betrayed someone. The guilt fades quickly though, replaced by a curious hope. You napped, briefly, accidentally, but still. A nap means something. A nap means your body hasn't completely forgotten how to do this. You tell no one. Victorian society is not a fan of naps. Or rather, it tolerates them in very specific formats. If you are a child, a baby, or a cat, you may nap freely. If you are a grown adult, especially one with responsibilities and appearances to maintain, napping suggests weakness, laziness, a character flaw in flannel. And yet, behind closed curtains and locked doors, people are doing it anyway, leaning against walls, slipping into short bursts of unconsciousness between chores or church services. You're not alone. You're just part of the sleepy underground. The term neurasthenia pops into your head as you brush crumbs off your lap. You read about it last week. A popular diagnosis in Victorian times, especially for those who seemed weary for no good reason. It covered everything from low energy to irritability, to mysterious aches to the inability to concentrate. Historians still argue whether neurasthenia was a catch-all term for modern life anxiety or an actual nervous disorder. But one thing is clear: if you were tired all the time and no one could figure out why, you got the label. And once you had it, you were allowed, encouraged even to nap. Sometimes multiple times a day. Of course. This leniency came with strings. For men, neurasthenia meant you were too intellectual, too ambitious, too full of genius to maintain a regular life. You were advised to take the rest cure. Go to the country, avoid newspapers, and let your brain cool. For women, it was far less glamorous. Neurasthenia meant you were too emotional, too sensitive, too full of feelings you clearly weren't equipped to process. Your prescription? Bed rest, isolation, milk-based diets. Absolutely no stimulation, no books, no letters, no laughter. Just you, a bed, and your thoughts slowly curling inward like burnt paper. You tried to fake it once, to feign the proper blend of symptoms. Weak pulse, sighing, lack of appetite. It didn't work. You were told to get some fresh air and cease indulging in mental fancies, which is rich, considering your mind runs nightly marathons without your permission. But this is Victorian medicine, deeply confident, rarely effective, and always convinced the problem is moral, not biological. Still, neurasthenia gave people permission to nap. And that's what interests you now. Because suddenly, you're napping regularly, not long, not consistently, but enough to take the edge off. It starts in chairs, then on rugs. Once on the stairs, you begin to track it. When the naps happen, what precedes them? They never happen when you're trying. Only when your brain is off guard, which feels cruel, but also illuminating. You start leaning into it. You trick yourself. You sit with a book you have no intention of reading. You stare at a plant until your vision fuzzes. You let your thoughts drift without trying to stop them. And sometimes, just sometimes, the nap arrives. Short, silent, free of dreams. Like someone pressing mute on the universe for 10 minutes. And you wake up changed, not fixed. But sooth. You write about it in your journal. Nap at 3:10, dreamt of wind and nothing else. Chair nap, 5 minutes. Woke up confused but calm. The entries become poems, rituals. You describe the feeling not as rest, but as detachment. Like slipping through a crack in the world. You're not unconscious. You're just gone for a bit. And when you return, the noise is quieter. Not gone, but muted. Manageable. You think of all the other people who must be doing this. Napping in shadows, behind desks, on benches. Stealing slivers of unconsciousness from a world that refuses to slow down. In factories, on trains, in the back of classrooms. There's something subversive about it. Something almost revolutionary. To rest not because you're allowed, but because you must. Because your body demands it. Because exhaustion is no longer a condition, it's a state of being. You read an essay in a tattered magazine about the nap scourge. A nervous doctor warning that society is becoming addicted to daytime rest. He blames urban life, indoor jobs, women's fashion, and overeducation. You laugh out loud. A real one. The kind that echoes. Because the idea that napping is a symptom of civilization collapsing is just so perfectly Victorian. They build empires, invent railways, conquer continents, and then get upset that people are tired. You start seeing naps everywhere. Delivery boy slumped against a barrel. The seamstress nodding off with a needle still in her hand. The priest who lingers a little too long on the altar steps between services. Even your doctor, the same one who told you to try fresh air and fewer opinions, is caught with his eyes closed behind his ledger. No one talks about it, but everyone's doing it. And you begin to wonder, what if this is the answer? Not full sleep, not the impossible 8 hours in a bed that hates you, but a patchwork, a quilt of short, stolen rests. What if your body is adapting, evolving, learning to survive on fragments? You experiment, strategic idleness, midday reclining. You arrange a chair near the warmest patch of light and let yourself droop. No pressure, no expectation, just the potential, and it works. More often than not, your eyes close, your breathing slows. You disappear. You're not cured. Far from it. You're still up most nights, counting breath and tracing cracks in the wall, but now you have something, a tool, a loophole. You stop fearing the night as much, because you know you'll get little pieces of rest somewhere. Like crumbs along a path, you start calling them pocket sleeps. Little deposits of peace to offset the withdrawal of night. You even write a guide, in your journal. A mock serious. Nap philosophy. Rule 1, don't chase it. Rule 2, never nap where you're supposed to be productive. Rule 3, silence is optional, but stillness is sacred. Rule 4, 5 minutes is enough. Rule 5, tell no one, because in this world, naps are still taboo, a secret sin, a quiet rebellion. But for you, they're survival. You're not resting. You're resisting. It's hard to believe now, as you lie wide-eyed in the bluish haze of another sleepless night. But once upon a time, rest was personal, private, something your body decided for itself when the sun dipped and the fire dwindled. But in Victorian England, sleep was no longer yours. It had been institutionalized, colonized, folded into the rigid scaffolding of social discipline. If you're not sleeping when and how you're supposed to, it's not merely unfortunate, it's suspicious, subversive, a breach of proper behavior. Sleep has become a matter of control. You know this because you feel it. In every instruction pamphlet, in every judgmental glance, in every letter from your aunt asking if you've corrected your nightly disobedience. That's what they call it now, disobedience. As if your eyelids failing to close is an act of rebellion. And in a way, it is. The Victorians have taken something organic and turned it into an hourly performance. You wake when the bell rings. You sleep when the chart says so. And if your body refuses, then clearly your soul is to blame. By the mid-19th century, Britain was deep into the business of managing bodies. Industrialization demanded workers who were punctual, sober, predictable. You couldn't have people nodding off at their machines or waking too late to shovel coal. That's how accidents happened, and worse, profits dropped. So the powers that be made sure that rest was regulated. School schedules, factory shifts, church bells, everything reinforced the same cycle. Rise early, work hard, retire promptly. Repeat until death or pension, whichever arrives first. Historians still argue whether this fixation on sleep timing was a reaction to urban chaos or a preemptive strike against anarchy. But either way, the effect was clear. Your bed became an extension of your employer's clock. You feel it every night, that pressure, the invisible ticking. You try to sleep not because you're tired, but because you're expected to. Your body isn't obeying its own rhythms anymore. It's attempting to meet a deadline. And every time you fail, every time you toss and turn past 11 p.m., you feel like a defector. You're not participating in the national project. You're not being productive. You're wasting time and worse, doing it on company consciousness. There's a pamphlet under your bed titled The Efficient Home, a bestseller in polite households. It includes a section called Restfulness for the Responsible, which outlines the ideal evening schedule. Begin winding down at 9 o'clock. Read only moral literature. No vigorous conversation. No food after sunset. Lights out by 10:30. Wake at 6 o'clock. The text is so cheerfully absolute it feels like satire. But it isn't. This was real advice, dispensed with grave authority. You once tried to follow it for a week. By day 4 you were sleep-deprived, malnourished, and afraid of your own shadow, which you were convinced was judging you. Even leisure was policed. You recall how the local paper scolded sit-ins who were caught out of doors past midnight, with no apparent moral purpose. One minister gave a sermon on the sin of late-night wakefulness, calling it an invitation to vice. He said darkness without slumber was where temptation lived. You were 12. You've never forgotten it. Not because it was profound, but because it was terrifying. Sleep wasn't just health, it was virtue. To be awake at the wrong hour was to become spiritually vulnerable. This attitude reached into homes, workplaces, even prisons. Convicts were given regulated sleep times and punished for waking early or late. Boarding schools monitored dormitories with the same discipline as barracks. Some institutions even hired sleep inspectors to ensure compliance. Imagine that. A man in a waistcoat with a lantern, checking to see if your dreams were properly timed. You half expect someone to invent a machine that records your eyelid movement and telegraphs the data to a central office labeled Ministry of Rest. And it worked to a degree. People internalized it. The structure, the guilt. You've caught yourself chastising your own exhaustion. Why am I tired at 4, you ask? That's not on the schedule. You hear others say it too. Colleagues, dragging themselves to their feet muttering, "No time to be sleepy." Parents shaking their children awake at dawn because the world doesn't wait. You've said it. You've lived it. And now, at 2:47 in the morning, you lie in bed feeling like a criminal because you aren't where the schedule says you should be. Unconscious. It's a special kind of madness, one that turns rest into obligation. You start to see it everywhere, in the architecture. Houses, designed with strict boundaries. Parlors for hosting, kitchens for cooking, bedrooms for sleeping. Each room with its moral function. No lounging, no excess. No napping on the fainting couch unless you've genuinely fainted. Even furniture was built to reinforce order. Hard chairs to prevent slouching. Beds with minimal padding to discourage indolence. The idea wasn't comfort, it was containment. You flip onto your side, pulling the quilt up to your chin. The room is quiet now, save for the soft tick of the mantel clock. It feels like a metronome for shame. You try counting the seconds between ticks, not sheep, just seconds. Maybe that will help. It doesn't, but at least it distracts you from the annoying sense that by failing to sleep, you're somehow betraying your community, your employer, your ancestors, your future. Because that's what this culture has done. It's made sleep political. To rest on your own terms is to reclaim autonomy. And in a society built on obedience, autonomy is dangerous. It's why you keep your naps secret. Why you lie when someone asks how you slept. Why you keep pretending you're just fine. Because to admit the truth, that your body won't cooperate with the system, is to invite scrutiny. Pity at best. Punishment at worst. So you keep performing. You go to bed on time. You keep the lights low. You drink your bitter teas and fluff your stern pillows. You lie still, pretending you're drifting when you're actually plotting how to survive tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Because deep down, you know this isn't a phase. It's a structure, a machine you were born into. One that turns sleep into duty, and duty into exhaustion. And still, you try. Because what else is there? The fantasy of a free sleep. A sleep that arrives when it wants, that leaves when it's done. That belongs only to you. You've tasted it in stolen naps and sudden dozes. But to live in it fully? That would be rebellion. And tonight, you're too tired to revolt. So you close your eyes. Breathe in, breathe out. Try to remember what sleep used to feel like before. It was measured, judged, and monetized. You don't remember. But you imagine. That's something. You've tried every strange brew, every machine, every ritual, and forgotten more bedtime advice than most people hear in a lifetime. But here's where the wellness charlatans really corner the market, the herbal industry. Hardly a Victorian household exists that doesn't have a cupboard full of sleepy time remedies. These aren't just tinctures. They're promise in little brown bottles, medicinal branding in the making. Chamomile, valerian, hops, poppy syrup, you name it, and someone's selling a distilled version as a restorative. You can't escape it, because everywhere you look, apothecaries, catalogs, newspapers, there's an advertisement. Gentle, natural, safe for all ages. And you, desperate and exhausted, can't help but buy. You read up on chamomile first. It's gentle, floral, smells like warm sunlight and private gardens. People claim it eases digestion and calms nerves. You brew a cup before bed. It tastes like soap dipped in sunshine, subtle and soft. You hold it, careful not to spill the warmth. You sip and wait. Nothing happens. But you like the ritual, the steam, the petals, the sense of civilized calm. That counts for something. Eventually, even more surprising, you fall asleep. Not deep, not perfect, but real. It feels like the herbal gods have paid attention. Valerian comes next. Smell of damp socks, they say. You laugh until you sniff the bottle and gag. But again, you drink it, hoping the experience matches the hype. You sink lower, the world dulls. Hypnotic, faint. A veil slips over your mind. You wake hours later, fuzzy as a moth. It works. Kind of. Enough. You keep burning these wildflowers, mixing them, alternating them like they're chess pieces in a sleep strategy. You begin to notice the commodification of rest. There are entire brands devoted to nervous tonics, women's calm elixirs, children's dream powders. One particularly theatrical company sells somnus syrup with a cherubic baby asleep on the label promising tranquil slumber without morning fog. The product claims sound impossibly sugar-coated, but you buy a bottle anyway. The syrup tastes like grape-flavored hope laced with laudanum. You notice your breathing ease before the medicine can even hit your stomach. As the bottles line up on your shelf, you notice a rabbit hole opening. Wild-crafted poppy heads, hops, flowers in tin cans, chamomile bags stamped with pseudo-Latin names. A whole mythology of natural cure unfolds. Herbalists quote medieval manuscripts. Some swear by moon phase harvesting picked under full moons for maximum potency. Others insist you must grow your own to feel the magic. You nod along, but wonder if the real effect isn't in the folklore, the tradition, the knowing you're part of something ancient and gentle. Historians still argue whether Victorian herbal remedies actually changed sleep patterns or just reinforced the placebo, the belief that they would. The evidence is murky. Doctors talk about improved digestion, calmer nerves, fewer nightmares, but none of them measure REM cycles or brain waves. They write down anecdote after anecdote. Patient slept 7 hours, ended chronic waking, mood improved. It's all qualitative and therefore ambiguous. But to you, it doesn't really matter. If it works sometimes even in your own head, it's worth a teaspoon at midnight. Your bedroom becomes a holy ground for herb worship. Every few nights, you plant a seedling in a pot near the window: calendula, lemon balm, lavender. You harvest the leaves yourself, using scissors kept under lock because your sister teased you about playing witch. You dry them, you crush them, you test them. It's work. It's comfort. It's a way to reclaim agency. You aren't waiting for a bottle from the apothecary. You're growing your own remedy. You even experiment with sleeping bags, old blankets rolled around you while herbs steam next to the pillow. A gentle sauna of scent and warmth. Hypnotic enough to doze. When sleep comes, it's warm and soft, like moss yielding under a passing foot. It isn't perfect, but it isn't awful either. It's a late-night victory. Of course, there are skeptics. The local doctor argues that herbal tonics are a substitute for proper food, proper rest, and proper living. He says they're a crutch, a pacifier for a society that refuses to slow down. Moralists say you're relying on witchcraft or heathen superstition. Heavier critics say it's vanity, self-care turned showy. You smile, none of that matters. You sleep on. There's a dark edge to the herbal industry too. You find articles about poppy cultivation leading to addiction, especially in children. Valerian overuse causing grogginess by day. Chamomile acting as allergen. The one time you drink hop-infused beer before bed, you wake up sick and confused. You realize these potions are commerce as much as compassion. They contain power, even if incomplete, and require respect. You approach each bottle with caution, mixing rituals with skepticism, tradition with doubt. Yet under it all is the simple human desire to sleep, to rest, to escape the relentless tick of high Victorian living. The quality of sleep doesn't always improve, but you feel something shift. Less dread at the night, more curiosity. You're experimenting, customizing, paying attention. You're no longer a passive patient. You're a researcher, an alchemist of rest. And that matters. In the soft lamplight, you take one more sip of chamomile, let the petals drift to the bottom. You breathe in the floral warmth. You whisper, "May this be gentle guidance, not cure." It doesn't matter if it works. What matters is that you've chosen this path, that you've called a truce with sleep, that you're no longer waiting to be told you deserve rest, you're growing it yourself. You close your eyes, cup in hand, breath even. It might not work, it might. But in that moment, it feels possible. And that is more than enough. You've become intimately acquainted with the midnight tabloids, by now not the respectable broadsheets, but the sensational pamphlets hawking Insomnia instantly cured, or The Sleepless Murderess, a true story. They're nestled between steamy penny dreadfuls and sensational crime broadsheets, designed to titillate as much as inform. Tonight, you're reading one under lamplight, the pages yellowed, the ink fragrant with cheap excitement. The headline boasts a horrifying tale. A woman who, driven mad by chronic insomnia, murdered her husband in cold blood knife, bedclothes. All. The text is vivid, gothic, horrifying, and entirely lacking nuance. You realize you're devouring a morality play disguised as news. Murderous insomnia myths were popular in Victorian culture. Fear was a powerful motivator, and what better way to scare people into compliance than to link sleeplessness with lethal rage? Historians still argue whether these stories were isolated incidents or urban legends designed to shame the restless. Either way, such tales spread fast. They were warnings woven into the moral fabric of society. If you can't sleep, you're inching toward madness or worse, murder. You turn the page. The pamphlet cites Doc Carter's case, a supposed account of a sleepless banker who strangled his mistress at 3 a.m. The narrative is full of lurid detail, the twitch of a nervous tick, the sheen on the blade, the moan before passing out. It's the kind of fiction that glazes over the sorrow of real lives, trading empathy for shock. And while you felt violence in your thoughts rage at the clock, at the city, even at your own limbs, you've never seriously considered murder. But reading this, you understand the fear it's meant to evoke, that losing sleep is losing your moral compass. In middle-class parlors, these pamphlets are passed from hand to hand, whispered about at tea, and paraded as cautionary tales. Look what happens to you if you don't repent and rest. They warn. Mothers warn daughters. Ministers warn congregations. To sleep poorly is not just unhealthy, it's morally suspect. You think of your neighbor, frail from exhaustion, and pity her. Then you remember the dread that falls over a room when the pamphlet is mentioned. Guilt is a powerful drug, and violent story myths are among its staples. But here's the ironic twist. These reports are spotlighting symptoms people already have. Sleeplessness doesn't make you a killer. What makes you a killer is being pushed into violence, frustration, despair. The pamphlets blame the symptom, not the system that created it. It's a kind of moral shrapnel. The real violence, overwork, neglect, poverty goes unremarked, while the woman's despair becomes villainy, not breakdown. If you stop to think, you're likely to call it out, but you don't. The narrative is gripping. So you finish the pamphlet. Feel your pulse reactive with something like relief that it's fiction. But a seed of unease has been planted. Then you notice the bottom corner, a small line reading, sleep aid enclosed. You flip it open to find a cheap sachet labeled soporific powder. You sniff it, it smells like musty lavender and chalk. It's probably harmless, but it's also another promise that comfort lies in consumption. Take this. Sleep. Arrive morally intact. It's comforting in a nihilistic way. You pour the powder into a spoon and mix it with water. You drink it not because you expect miracles, but because you're tired of the fear, the guilt, the monstrous implications of every long night. You swallow that powder like a shield, a messy talisman against something too dark to name. After that, you can't sleep. Or not yet, but you feel something shift. Not hope exactly. Not despair. The emptiness in between. The lull before the storm. And in that lull, you realize you've watched enough horror plays, enough morality tales to see what's missing. What's missing is compassion. What's missing is care. No pamphlet offers solace. No powder promises gentleness. It's all about danger, fear, consequence. You stand and walk to your window, the city breathing low and soft. You peer out and see no murderers in the fog. No gaslit silhouettes approaching with ill intent. Just endless streets and distant church bells. You think about what you've read, the narrative of the wrecked soul, the restless hours, the tear-stained pillows. You think about how easy it would be to overturn the story and tell a different one of people who survived the night, who woke at dawn and found themselves still worthy of care, still complex, still fragile but not broken. You think of your journal, your naps, your herbs, your tiny rebellions. Those aren't sensational stories. They're quieter, but they're true. You pocket the pamphlet, not to throw away, but to hold, to remember. To perhaps write your own pamphlet someday, one that offers confession, not condemnation. One that doesn't dramatize despair, but acknowledges resilience. Because in a culture that debased rest and judged the restless, maybe the real revolution is building a narrative of endurance, of shared humanity, of imperfect nights that don't require murder to be meaningful. You blow out the lamp. You close the window, the cool night air lingering against your face. You lie down again, no illusions, no promises, just breathing, and the steady hum of living through it. The pamphlet is on the nightstand now, a reminder of what culture fears, the untamed mind. But tonight, you choose a different story. One written softly in the dark. You're sitting at the edge of your bed again, drinking the last sips of an herbal decoction, warmed just enough to soothe, not burn. The steam curls into the dim lamplight, twisting like smoke from a lantern bellows. Outside, the streets. Empty now, save for the occasional drip of water off stone eaves and that distant, relentless echo of a factory whistle refusing to rest. As you cradle the cup, the truth settles around you. After 19 nights of ritual, concoction, confession, and desperate hope, you still can't guarantee sleep. But tonight doesn't feel like failure. It feels like an ending. Or at least a threshold. Victorian insomnia cures beef tea, lettuce water, laudanum, electricity, mesmerism. Herbal elixirs were all designed to tame the restless mind, to squeeze order from chaos, to tame the wildness of worn souls. All of it cost money, time, social capital, personal pride. All of it failed over and again because sleep is stubborn. Sleep is private. It cannot fully be prescribed or patented. It must be earned, and even that promise is tenuous. In chasing sleep, you weren't broken. You were hopeful. That hope is not broken. It's the ember beneath exhaustion. You've performed for doctors, obeyed pamphlets, practiced etiquette, aligned your bed to moral compass, journaled your unraveling, survived public hysteria and private shame. You've absorbed guilt for every wakeful hour. You've been told you're lazy, immoral, hysterical, inefficient, dangerous, worse, unproductive, and still you persisted. That persistence has meaning. You've turned insomnia into a mirror, examining It surfaces instead of hiding from them. You've documented your mind in shadowed scribbles, in silent naps, in quiet defiance. No cure, no resolution. Maybe, but there's clarity. Tonight, as you drink, you decide something. You decide that the cure wasn't going to be in a bottle, or a galvanic current, or a pendulum swing. The cure, if it's even the right word, was reclaiming your story. Sleeping on your own terms, scratching out the margins. Planting herbs. Not because they promised magic, but because wiring the world for rest means starting in your own hands, on your terms. Subverting it all by being steadier, quieter, less ashamed. In the morning, you'll wake likely groggy, definitely tired. You'll greet the fogged sunlight through your window and take the first slow step into a world built to keep you awake. And then you'll create a fragment of rest, a break, a pocket of truce, a space without expectation or measurement. Maybe another nap, maybe another page in the journal, maybe just a candle flickering over your own breathing. Sleeping or not, sleeping isn't your failing. The system's design that treated rest like a crime is, and recognizing that is not defeat. It's liberation. So you swallow the cup, flick the dregs into the sink, close the kettle lid, and lift your eyes to the dark ceiling. For the first time in a long time, you feel neither shame nor fear. You feel thought, ownership. You've lived through insomnias. Grand parade, and you've grown around it, not under it. So here we are. 2 hours across gaslit nights, laudanum tips, journal entries as tall as you are, wild herbs thought to work wonders, and moralistic pamphlets heard in every whisper. No single cure, no final chapter, just this moment. Breathe in, breathe out. You're still here, so is the world. Maybe that's enough. The world softens. Edges of thought blur, as if the dark room compensates for the day's harsh angles. Your breath doesn't rush, it curves, settles. There are no demands here, no clocks humming accusations. Each exhale releases the weight you carried, the night's performance, the guilt, the endless to-do list. You're no longer racing through the hours, chasing a clock's approval. You're just breathing, simple, human, enough. Remember the herbs in your cup. Remember how delicate hope tasted warm chamomile, valerian's quiet insistence. Those fragrant petals weren't guarantees, they were gestures. Tiny acts of kindness you gave yourself. You didn't heal overnight. You whispered to yourself in a time of stillness. You invited softness, permission to rest, even if the night was still long. Still uncertain. The journals, the naps, the experiments, they weren't failures. They were invitations to curiosity, empathy, rebellion. To see insomnia not as weakness, but as a window into how deeply alive we can be, even when unplugged from sleep. So when you lie here now, let the quiet do its work. Let each inhale fill the spaces sleeplessness carved. Let each exhale release the world's expectation. There's no tidy conclusion. No moral tidy or miraculous cure. And you probably won't. Wake up feeling fixed. But you might wake with gentleness in your bones. You might wake willing to let tiredness be what it is. Signal, not sentence. A call for slower steps, softer breaths, and perhaps another page in your journal full of things you thought when you were too awake to forget. You've walked through Victorian nights stocked with panics and prescriptions and steel-edged promises. You've survived. And here, in this quiet moment, you're invited to rest not because you must, but because you can. Your story isn't about sleeplessness consuming you. It's about you enduring, witnessing, resisting, reclaiming. Sleep might still play hard to get. But right now, beneath a single lamp or behind closed eyes, you're already at rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.